A racist police officer assumes that a black man in the park is a criminal and arrests him for no reason. Afterwards, the officer realizes that he has just arrested an FBI agent. Marcus Davis sat on a weathered bench in Riverside Park, the late afternoon sun casting a warm glow over the lush greenery. He turned a page in the book he was reading, momentarily losing himself in the quiet rustle of leaves and the distant laughter of children playing. The park was one of his favorite places, a small sanctuary in a bustling city where he could clear his mind and escape the demands of his job. Today, though, his thoughts were interrupted. Across the park, Officer Brian Harkins patrolled the area, his sharp eyes scanning the surroundings. He had walked this beat for over 2 decades, and in his mind, he knew this city better than anyone. When he noticed Marcus sitting alone on the bench, something in his gut stirred, a feeling he had learned to trust over the years. A black man, sitting alone, too calm, too composed. Suspicion prickled at the edges of his thoughts. Never seen him around here before, Brian muttered under his breath. He stopped walking and watched Marcus for a moment, trying to place the feeling. There had been reports of a suspect fitting a general description that matched Marcus, a vague, flimsy lead. But it was enough for Brian. Marcus felt the weight of someone's gaze and looked up from his book. He noticed Brian standing a distance away, staring at him with a look that was all too familiar. Marcus had been in situations like this before. He could read the officer's expression easily, prejudice masquerading as concern, a suspicion that had no basis other than the color of his skin. But Marcus didn't flinch. Instead, he closed his book slowly, marking the page with a finger, and met Brian's gaze. Brian's grip on his baton tightened. He saw the way Marcus looked at him, steady, unafraid. It unnerved him. "Let's see what this guy's up to," Brian muttered as he started walking towards Marcus, his posture stiffening with each step. He didn't like how Marcus was looking at him, didn't like the calmness, the lack of fear. It was unsettling. Marcus watched Brian approach, keeping his expression neutral. He knew what was coming and had seen it many times before. The situation was already loaded, and he knew that how he responded in the next few moments could determine how it played out. He wasn't in the mood for this today, but he also wasn't going to give the officer any reason to escalate the situation. "Afternoon," Brian said as he reached the bench. His tone was polite, but there was an edge to it. Marcus could hear the underlying suspicion. "Afternoon," Marcus replied, his voice calm and even. He kept his hands visible, resting them on the closed book in his lap. "What brings you out here today?" Brian asked, his eyes scanning Marcus's face, then flicking to the book. He was fishing for something, anything, to justify the feeling gnawing at him. "Just enjoying the park," Marcus said. "It's a nice day." Brian nodded slowly, though he wasn't really listening. He was more interested in what Marcus wasn't saying, in what he could dig out from beneath the surface. "You from around here?" Marcus smiled slightly, though it didn't reach his eyes. "I've been around." The non-answer didn't sit well with Brian. He shifted his weight, his stance becoming more confrontational. "Mind if I see some ID?" Marcus's smile faded. This was the point where things could go sideways. He knew his rights, knew he wasn't obligated to show ID just for sitting in a public park, but he also knew that refusing could escalate the situation quickly. Still, he wasn't going to let this officer intimidate him. "Am I under arrest?" Marcus asked, his tone measured. He met Brian's gaze without flinching. Brian bristled at the question. There was that calmness again, that refusal to be intimidated. It made him uneasy, made him feel like he was losing control of the situation. "You will be if you don't cooperate," Brian shot back, his hand moving to rest on his holster. Marcus took a slow breath, keeping his expression neutral. He didn't like where this was heading, but he wasn't going to back down. "I'm just sitting in a park," he said, his voice steady. "Is there a law against that?" Brian's patience was wearing thin. "You fit the description of someone we're looking for," he said, though even he knew how weak the excuse sounded. He stepped closer, looming over Marcus. Marcus didn't move. He held Brian's gaze, refusing to give him the reaction he was looking for. "And what description is that?" Marcus asked quietly. Brian's jaw tightened. He didn't have a good answer, and he knew it. But admitting that would mean losing face, losing control. He wasn't about to let that happen. "Don't get smart with me," he snapped. "Show me some ID now." For a moment, the two men locked eyes, the tension thickening between them. Marcus knew he could push back and could assert his rights. But he also knew that doing so could make this situation even more dangerous. He decided to comply for now. Without a word, he reached into his pocket, slowly, deliberately, and pulled out his wallet. Brian watched every movement closely, his body coiled like a spring. When Marcus handed over his ID, Brian snatched it out of his hand and glanced at it. The name didn't mean anything to him, but that didn't matter. He'd already made up his mind. "Stand up," Brian ordered, stepping back to give Marcus room. Marcus sighed inwardly, but did as he was told, rising slowly from the bench. He kept his hands visible, not wanting to give Brian any reason to claim he felt threatened. "Turn around," Brian said, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. Marcus felt a surge of frustration, but pushed it down. He turned around, letting Brian cuff him without resistance. He could hear people nearby, could feel their eyes on him, but he stayed calm, knowing that the worst thing he could do now was give in to anger. As Brian tightened the cuffs around Marcus's wrists, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that he was making a mistake. But his pride wouldn't let him stop now. He grabbed Marcus's arm and started leading him towards the patrol car parked nearby. Marcus didn't say a word as they walked, his mind already shifting to what would come next. He wasn't worried about himself. He knew who he was, knew that this officer would find out soon enough, but he couldn't help but feel a deep weariness, a tiredness that went beyond this one encounter. It was the exhaustion of knowing that, despite all his accomplishments, all his efforts, he was still seen as just another black man in the eyes of too many people like Officer Brian Harkins. As they reached the patrol car, Brian opened the back door and guided Marcus inside, the tension still hanging in the air. Marcus settled into the seat, the cold metal of the handcuffs biting into his wrists. He looked out the window as the car pulled away from the park, watching the trees blur past, wondering how this day, like so many others, had gone so wrong. The patrol car's engine hummed as Officer Brian Harkins drove Marcus Davis toward the precinct. Brian's grip on the steering wheel was tight, his knuckles white as he processed what had just happened. He didn't like the way Marcus had looked at him back there in the park, calm, unafraid, like he knew something Brian didn't. It gnawed at him, made him question his instincts, but his pride wouldn't let him admit that. Marcus sat quietly in the back seat, his hands cuffed behind him. The city streets blurred by, but his mind wasn't on the passing scenery. Instead, he was focused on what would happen next. He knew the system, knew how quickly things could escalate if he wasn't careful, but he also knew his own power, the authority that came with his position, an authority that Officer Harkins had no idea about. As they neared the precinct, Brian glanced at Marcus in the rearview mirror. "What were you really doing in that park?" he asked, his voice edged with suspicion. Marcus met Brian's eyes in the mirror, his expression unreadable. "I told you," he replied calmly. "I was just reading," Brian scoffed. "A guy like you, just sitting around reading? You expect me to believe that?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "A guy like me?" he repeated, his tone measured. Brian hesitated for a moment, realizing the slip in his words. But instead of backing down, he doubled down. "You don't look like someone who spends his afternoons reading in the park," he said, trying to justify his actions. Marcus didn't respond immediately. He let the silence stretch, the tension in the car thickening. When he finally spoke, his voice was cool, controlled. "And what does someone like me look like, officer?" Brian didn't answer. He couldn't. He knew what he was implying, knew how it sounded, but he wasn't about to admit that to Marcus or to himself. Instead, he focused on driving, his frustration mounting as Marcus's calm demeanor continued to unsettle him. The car pulled into the precinct's parking lot, and Brian parked near the entrance. He got out first, then opened the back door and helped Marcus out, the cuffs still digging into Marcus's wrists. As they walked toward the building, Brian's thoughts raced. He needed to figure out what to do next. This wasn't how arrests were supposed to go. The suspect was supposed to be scared, compliant, not composed, and challenging him with every word. Inside the precinct, the usual buzz of activity filled the air. Officers filing reports, phones ringing, the hum of conversation. Brian led Marcus through the main hall, ignoring the curious glances from other officers. He didn't want to explain himself just yet, not until he was sure of his next move. They reached the booking area, and Brian signaled for Marcus to stand by the processing desk. The officer behind the desk, a young man named Officer Jenkins, looked up, surprised to see Brian bringing someone in. "What's this about?" Jenkins asked, his eyes flicking to Marcus, then back to Brian. "Caught him acting suspicious in the park," Brian replied, his tone clipped. He handed over Marcus's ID, still unwilling to admit that he didn't have a solid reason for the arrest. Jenkins glanced at the ID, then back at Marcus. There was a flicker of recognition in his eyes, but he quickly masked it, nodding as he began typing into the computer. Marcus noticed the brief hesitation, filing it away in his mind. The recognition was subtle, but it was there. Someone in this precinct knew who he was. Captain Bennett's in her office, Jenkins said as he handed the ID back to Brian. You'll need to take him to her. Brian stiffened slightly. Captain Laura Bennett was known for being tough but fair, a stickler for procedure. He hadn't planned on involving her so soon, but he didn't have a choice. All right, Brian said, his voice tight. He turned to Marcus, his grip firm on Marcus's arm. Let's go. Marcus walked beside Brian, his expression still unreadable. As they approached Captain Bennett's office, he could sense the tension in Brian, the uncertainty that the officer was trying so hard to hide. It was the first crack in the armor, and Marcus noted it with quiet satisfaction. Brian knocked on the door, then opened it when he heard Captain Bennett's voice from inside. The office was neat, organized, with a large desk in the center and shelves lined with books and files. Captain Bennett, a woman in her early 40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, looked up from her paperwork as they entered. Officer Harkins, she said, her tone neutral. What's this about? Brian stepped forward, guiding Marcus into the room. Caught this guy in the park, Captain. He was acting suspicious. Wouldn't cooperate when I asked for ID. Captain Bennett's gaze shifted to Marcus, and for a split second, there was a flicker of recognition, just like Jenkins. But she quickly masked it, her expression turning professional. Is that so? She said, her voice even. Marcus met her eyes and saw the recognition there. He knew that Captain Bennett was aware of who he was, but she was playing it carefully, waiting to see how Brian would handle the situation. That's right, Brian continued, oblivious to the silent exchange between Marcus and Bennett. I brought him in for questioning. Captain Bennett nodded slowly, her eyes narrowing slightly. I see. And did you have probable cause to arrest him? Brian hesitated, feeling the ground beneath him start to shift. He wouldn't cooperate, Captain, he repeated, though it sounded weaker this time. Captain Bennett leaned back in her chair, studying Brian carefully. Officer Harkins, why don't you step outside for a moment? I'd like to speak with Mr. Davis alone. Brian blinked, taken aback by the request. But Captain, outside, Harkins, Bennett said firmly, leaving no room for argument. Reluctantly, Brian released Marcus and stepped out of the office, closing the door behind him. As soon as he was gone, Captain Bennett's demeanor shifted slightly, becoming less formal. Mr. Davis, she said, her voice calm, I apologize for this misunderstanding. Marcus allowed himself a small smile. No need to apologize, Captain. You're just doing your job. Bennett sighed, glancing at the closed door. I'm aware of who you are, but I'd appreciate it if we kept that under wraps for now. I need to handle this situation carefully. Marcus nodded. Of course, I'm not here to cause trouble, Captain. I just want to make sure things are handled properly. They will be, Bennett assured him. I'll speak with Officer Harkins and deal with this appropriately, but I have to ask, why didn't you just tell him who you are? Marcus's smile faded, replaced by a more serious expression. Because it shouldn't matter, Captain. My identity shouldn't be the reason he decides to treat me with respect. Captain Bennett considered his words, then nodded in understanding. You're right. It shouldn't matter. But unfortunately, it does to some people. The room fell silent for a moment, the weight of the situation hanging in the air. Finally, Captain Bennett stood up. I'll call Officer Harkins back in. We'll resolve this. Marcus nodded again, watching as Captain Bennett moved to the door. The confrontation wasn't over, but he knew he had the upper hand now. The truth would come out soon enough, and Officer Harkins would have to face the consequences of his actions. As Captain Bennett opened the door, Brian stepped back inside, his expression wary. He could sense that something had shifted, but he didn't know what. He glanced at Marcus, who stood calmly, waiting. Mr. Davis here is not the man you were looking for. You'll release him immediately. Brian blinked, the words taking a moment to sink in. What? But Captain, he... Immediately, officer, Bennett repeated, her voice leaving no room for argument. Brian hesitated, then finally reached for the keys to unlock Marcus's handcuffs. His hand shook slightly as he did so, the realization of his mistake beginning to dawn on him. As the cuffs clicked open, Marcus rubbed his wrists, giving Brian a measured look. Thank you, officer, he said, his tone calm but carrying an undertone of finality. Brian swallowed hard, unsure of what to say. You're free to go, he muttered, stepping back. Marcus nodded and turned to Captain Bennett. I'll be in touch, Captain, he said quietly. There's still a lot to discuss. Captain Bennett nodded in return, understanding the weight behind his words. I look forward to it, Mr. Davis. With that, Marcus walked out of the office, leaving Brian standing there, a sinking feeling in his gut. The confrontation was over, but the consequences were only beginning. Brian Harkins sat at his desk in the precinct, the tension in his body refusing to dissipate. He had barely been able to concentrate since Captain Bennett had released Marcus Davis. The unease gnawed at him, deepened by the fact that he still didn't understand what had just happened. He knew he had made a mistake, but the full extent of it was still out of reach. The silence of the precinct around him was both comforting and unnerving, a space for his thoughts to spiral. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps approaching his desk snapped him out of his reverie. He looked up to see Captain Bennett walking toward him, her expression serious. Brian's stomach tightened. He knew this wasn't going to be a casual conversation. "Officer Harkins, my office. Now," Captain Bennett said, her tone leaving no room for argument. Brian stood up immediately, trying to suppress the nervousness that was beginning to creep into his demeanor. He followed her to the office, each step feeling heavier than the last. Once inside, Captain Bennett closed the door behind him and gestured for him to sit. Brian hesitated for a moment before sitting down. He could feel the tension in the room, the unspoken weight of what was coming. Captain Bennett moved behind her desk, took a deep breath, and then sat down across from him, her sharp eyes fixed on his. "Officer Harkins," she began, her tone measured but stern. "Do you have any idea who Marcus Davis is?" Brian shook his head, his confusion deepening. "No, Captain. Just some guy in the park." Captain Bennett leaned forward, her gaze never leaving Brian's. "Marcus Davis isn't just some guy in the park. He's a special agent, one of their top agents, in fact." The words hit Brian like a physical blow. His eyes widened in shock, the implications of what he had done crashing down on him. "An FBI agent?" he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. "That's right," Bennett said, her voice firm. "And more than that, he's highly respected within the Bureau. His arrest is going to have serious consequences. Not just for you, but for this entire precinct." Brian's mind raced, trying to piece together what this meant. He had profiled and arrested an innocent man, a federal agent no less, based on nothing more than his own biased assumptions. The enormity of his mistake began to settle in, bringing with it a cold, creeping dread. "I didn't know, Captain," Brian said, his voice shaky. "I didn't know who he was." "That's the problem, Harkins," Bennett replied, her tone still firm. "It shouldn't have mattered who he was. Your actions were based on assumptions and prejudices, not on any real evidence. You can't arrest someone just because they don't look like they belong in a park." Brian wanted to argue, to defend himself, but the words wouldn't come. Deep down, he knew Captain Bennett was right. He had let his biases guide his actions, and now he was facing the consequences. "What happens now?" Brian asked, his voice low, almost resigned. Captain Bennett sighed, leaning back in her chair. "For now, you're being placed on temporary leave while we investigate this incident. I've already spoken with the higher-ups, and they're not happy, to say the least. There will be an official review, and depending on the outcome, you could face disciplinary action, up to and including termination." Brian's heart sank. Termination. The word hung in the air like a death sentence. He had been a cop for over 2 decades, and the thought of losing his job, his career, was almost too much to bear. But as much as he wanted to deny it, he knew he had no one to blame but himself. I understand, Captain," Brian finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. Bennett studied him for a moment, her expression softening slightly. "I know this isn't easy to hear, Harkins, but you need to understand that your actions have consequences, not just for you, but for the people you serve. We can't afford to have officers who let their biases dictate their decisions." Brian nodded, though his mind was still reeling. The reality of his situation was starting to sink in, and with it came a flood of regret. He had always prided himself on being a good cop, someone who upheld the law and protected the community. But now all of that was in jeopardy because of one careless, prejudiced decision. Captain Bennett stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. "You're dismissed, Officer Harkins. I'll notify you when the review is scheduled." Brian stood up as well, feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders. "Thank you, Captain," he mumbled, before turning and walking out of the office. As he left the precinct, the familiar sights and sounds that had once brought him comfort now felt distant, almost alien. He walked to his car in a daze, the reality of his situation pressing down on him like a heavy fog. He had been a cop for so long that he didn't know who he was without the badge. The thought of losing it, of being branded as a failure, terrified him. But beneath the fear, there was something else, an unfamiliar sense of doubt. For the first time, Brian was forced to confront the fact that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't the upstanding officer he had always believed himself to be. That maybe he had let his biases and prejudices guide his actions more than he was willing to admit. As he drove home, the city streets passing by in a blur, Brian couldn't shake the image of Marcus Davis's calm, unflinching gaze. It was a look that had unsettled him from the start, and now he understood why. Marcus had seen right through him, had known exactly what was happening, even before Brian himself did. When Brian finally arrived home, he sat in his car for a long moment, staring at the steering wheel. The day's events played over and over in his mind, each repetition making the weight of his actions heavier. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew that his life had just changed irrevocably. With a heavy sigh, Brian got out of the car and walked into his house, the silence of the empty rooms pressing in on him. He sank into a chair, his thoughts a tangled mess of fear, regret, and uncertainty. For the first time in a long while, he didn't know what to do next. Brian Harkins stood in the corridor outside the conference room, his heart pounding in his chest. The precinct was quieter than usual, the atmosphere heavy with the anticipation of what was about to unfold. The official review was about to begin, and Brian knew that every word he said in the next hour would determine the future of his career. He glanced at his reflection in the window across from him. The man staring back looked older, more worn than he had just days ago. There was a stiffness in his posture, a tightness around his eyes that hadn't been there before. He straightened his uniform, took a deep breath, and forced himself to focus. This was his chance to explain, to justify his actions, though deep down he wasn't sure how to do that anymore. The door to the conference room opened, and Captain Bennett appeared, her expression unreadable. "We're ready for you, Officer Harkins," she said, her voice steady. Brian nodded, swallowing hard as he followed her into the room. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. The long table was lined with stern-faced officials, representatives from the precinct's Internal Affairs Division, a couple of high-ranking officers, and at the far end, a man in a suit whom Brian instantly recognized as Marcus Davis. Marcus's presence was like a punch to the gut. Brian had hoped that he wouldn't be there, that he wouldn't have to face him again. But there he was, sitting calmly, his eyes focused on Brian as if studying him. The look in those eyes was the same as before, calm, unflinching, but with an edge of quiet authority that made Brian feel small. Captain Bennett took her seat at the head of the table, motioning for Brian to sit in the chair opposite her. When he did so, trying to ignore the way his palms were sweating. The room was silent, the weight of judgment heavy in the air. "Officer Harkins," Bennett began, her tone formal, "this review is to determine the appropriateness of your actions during the arrest of Mr. Marcus Davis. We will go over the events leading up to the arrest, your conduct during the arrest, and the consequences that have followed. Do you understand the gravity of this situation?" "Yes, Captain," Brian replied, his voice low but steady. He glanced briefly at Marcus, who was watching him intently, before returning his focus to Bennett. "Good," Bennett said, nodding. "Let's start with the incident report. According to your statement, you arrested Mr. Davis because you believed he was a suspect in a recent series of robberies. Is that correct?" Brian nodded. "Yes, Captain. I saw him in the park, and he matched the description we had. Tall, black male, early 40s. He was acting suspiciously, so I approached him." "And what exactly was suspicious about his behavior?" Bennett asked, her tone neutral but probing. Brian hesitated, knowing that his answer here was crucial. "He was alone, just sitting there, and when I asked for his ID, he was evasive." "Evasive how?" Bennett pressed. "He didn't want to show me his ID right away," Brian explained, though even as he said the words, they sounded weak to his own ears. "He seemed like he was hiding something." Marcus's voice cut through the air, calm but firm. "I was reading a book, Officer Harkins. Not exactly the behavior of a criminal on the run." Brian flinched slightly at Marcus's words but kept his focus on Bennett. "I was just doing my job, Captain. I was trying to protect the community." "And did you find anything on Mr. Davis that would indicate he was involved in any criminal activity?" Bennett asked, her eyes narrowing slightly. Brian shook his head. "No, Captain. He was clean." There was a pause, a heavy silence that filled the room as everyone processed what had been said. Then one of the internal affairs officers spoke up, his voice stern. "Officer Harkins, did it ever occur to you that Mr. Davis might have been telling the truth? That he wasn't the suspect you were looking for?" Brian hesitated again, his mind racing for the right words. I was following protocol. We're trained to be cautious, to assume that someone might be dangerous until proven otherwise. But did you consider that your assumptions might have been influenced by factors other than protocol?" the officer asked pointedly. Brian's throat tightened. He knew what they were getting at, and he knew there was no good answer. "I didn't mean to profile him," he said, his voice faltering slightly. "I was just doing my job." Marcus leaned forward slightly, his gaze still fixed on Brian. "Your job is to protect and serve, Officer Harkins, not to judge people based on their appearance." Brian met Marcus's eyes, and for a moment he felt a surge of defensiveness, but it was quickly followed by a wave of guilt. He had been in law enforcement long enough to know when he was wrong, and this was one of those times. Captain Bennett cleared her throat, drawing the room's attention back to her. Officer Harkins, this review isn't just about what happened that day. It's about the mindset that led to your actions. We need to ensure that every officer in this precinct is upholding the values of fairness and justice. This isn't just about you, it's about the integrity of the entire police force. Brian felt a sinking feeling in his gut. He knew that this wasn't just about whether or not he had made a mistake, it was about whether he was fit to continue wearing the badge. The realization hit him hard, and for a moment he struggled to find his voice. "I understand, Captain," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't mean to. I didn't want to." He stopped, the words choking in his throat. Captain Bennett softened slightly, though her tone remained firm. "We all make mistakes, Harkins, but it's how we deal with those mistakes that define us. You need to think very carefully about the kind of officer you want to be." There was another long pause, the weight of the situation pressing down on everyone in the room. Then Marcus spoke again, his voice calm but carrying a weight of authority. "Captain Bennett, may I say something?" Bennett nodded. "Of course, Mr. Davis." Marcus stood up, his presence commanding the attention of the room. He looked directly at Brian, his expression serious but not unkind. "I understand that being a police officer is a difficult job. You are under constant pressure, and sometimes that pressure can lead to bad decisions. But we can't allow those bad decisions to go unchecked. This isn't just about holding Officer Harkins accountable. It's about ensuring that something like this doesn't happen again." Brian listened, his heart heavy. He knew Marcus was right, but the truth of it was hard to swallow. He had spent his entire career believing he was doing the right thing. But now he was faced with the reality that his actions had caused harm, that his biases had blinded him to the truth. Marcus continued, his voice steady. "I'm not here to ruin anyone's career, but I am here to make sure that the next time an officer encounters someone like me, they think twice before making assumptions. This is an opportunity for change, and I hope that this precinct will take it seriously." Captain Bennett nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Thank you, Mr. Davis. Your words are noted." Marcus sat down again, his gaze still on Brian. There was no malice in his eyes, but there was a firmness, a resolve that made it clear he wouldn't tolerate any further injustice. Captain Bennett looked at Brian, her tone softer but still authoritative. "Officer Harkins, you'll remain on temporary leave while we continue this review. I suggest you take this time to reflect on what's been said here today. We'll reconvene in a few days to discuss the next steps." Brian nodded numbly, the weight of everything pressing down on him. "Yes, Captain," he said quietly. The meeting was adjourned, and as the officials began to file out of the room, Brian remained seated, his mind racing. He had come into this review hoping to defend himself, to justify his actions, but now all he could think about was how wrong he had been. The realization was like a cold, hard truth that he couldn't escape. As the last of the officials left the room, Brian stood up slowly, his movements heavy with the burden of his thoughts. He glanced at Marcus one last time, and for a moment their eyes met. There was no animosity in Marcus's gaze, just a quiet determination, a resolve to see justice done. Brian looked away, unable to hold Marcus's gaze any longer. He knew that he had a lot to think about, a lot to come to terms with. And as he walked out of the conference room, the weight of his actions and their consequences hung over him like a dark cloud. Captain Laura Bennett sat in her office, staring at the stack of reports on her desk. Each piece of paper represented a fragment of the truth she was trying to piece together. The internal investigation into Brian Harkins's conduct was underway, and it was her responsibility to ensure that every detail was thoroughly examined. She rubbed her temples, feeling the tension in her shoulders. The precinct had always prided itself on maintaining high standards, but this incident had shaken that foundation. Whatever the outcome, Bennett knew that the investigation would have far-reaching consequences, not just for Brian, but for the entire department. Taking a deep breath, she reached for the first report, the initial witness statements from the park. She had already read them multiple times, but each reread added weight to the growing evidence against Brian. The witnesses, all park-goers present during the arrest, described the event with stark clarity. Their accounts were consistent. Brian had approached Marcus Davis with an assumption that he was a criminal, without hesitation and without attempting to de-escalate. Bennett turned to the next report, the body cam footage. She had watched it several times, each viewing more uncomfortable than the last. The footage was clear and unambiguous. Brian's voice, his tone, and his body language reflected the assumptions he had made from the moment he saw Marcus. The aggression in his approach, the way he had disregarded Marcus's attempts to explain, the force he used during the arrest. It was all there, laid bare for anyone to see. A knock at the door pulled Bennett from her thoughts. She looked up to see Detective Harper, her second-in-command for the investigation, standing in the doorway. "I've got the last of the witness interviews," Harper said, holding up a file, "and I've scheduled Marcus Davis for later this afternoon." "Thanks, Harper," Bennett replied, taking the file. "How's it looking?" Harper sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "Not good, Captain. Most of the witnesses are pretty clear about what they saw. And from what I can tell, the body cam footage backs them up." Bennett nodded grimly. "I was afraid of that." "Are we bringing Brian in for another round of questions?" Harper asked. "Yeah," Bennett said, leaning back in her chair. "Let's see if he's ready to talk more openly about what happened." Harper nodded and left the office, leaving Bennett alone with the file. She flipped it open and began reading the new witness statements. They were consistent with the others. Brian had acted aggressively from the start, and it was clear that Marcus had been trying to defuse the situation. But Brian hadn't listened. As Bennett finished reading, she felt a deep sense of unease. She had known Brian for years. He had always been a solid officer, but this incident had exposed a side of him that Bennett had never seen before. The hours passed slowly as Bennett continued to review the evidence. Finally, there was another knock at her door, and Harper entered, followed by Brian. "Come in, Harkins," Bennett said, keeping her voice neutral. Brian looked exhausted, his eyes dark with sleeplessness. He sat down across from Bennett, glancing nervously at Harper, who took a seat beside him. "We're going to go over the events of that day again," Bennett said, leaning forward slightly. "I need you to be completely honest with us, Brian. This is your chance to explain your side of the story." Brian nodded, but his expression was tight. "I understand, Captain." Bennett glanced at Harper, who started the questioning. "Brian, walk us through what was going through your mind when you first saw Marcus Davis in the park." Brian hesitated, his eyes shifting as he searched for the right words. I saw a man who fit the description of the suspect we were looking for. It was a high-pressure situation, and I had to make a quick decision." "And what made you so sure he was the suspect?" Harper pressed. "He matched the description," Brian repeated, his voice more defensive now. "We were looking for a black male around his height and build. He was acting suspiciously, like he was trying to hide something." Bennett could hear the strain in Brian's voice, the way he was grasping at justifications. "Brian, the witness statements and the body cam footage tell a different story. They show that Marcus Davis was cooperative, that he tried to explain who he was, but you didn't listen." Brian shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "He was trying to throw me off, to buy time. I was just following my training, Captain." "Your training," Bennett repeated, her tone sharp. "Brian, your training doesn't excuse racial profiling. It doesn't excuse the fact that you escalated a situation that didn't need to be escalated." Brian opened his mouth to respond, but Bennett held up a hand to stop him. "Look, Brian, I'm not here to argue with you. I'm here to find out the truth. The evidence we've gathered so far isn't in your favor. It shows that you made assumptions based on race and that those assumptions led to an unjust arrest." There was a long silence as Brian processed Bennett's words. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I was just trying to do my job." Bennett sighed. "I know, Brian, but intent doesn't change the impact of your actions. This isn't just about you. It's about what your actions represent and how they affect the people we're supposed to protect." Before Brian could respond, there was another knock at the door. Harper stood and opened it, revealing Marcus Davis, who stepped into the room with a calm, composed demeanor. "Mr. Davis, thank you for coming in," Bennett said, standing to shake Marcus's hand. Marcus nodded, his expression neutral. "Of course, Captain." Bennett motioned for Marcus to take a seat, then turned back to Brian. "Brian, we're going to hear from Mr. Davis now. I want you to listen carefully." Brian nodded, though he couldn't meet Marcus's eyes. Bennett gestured for Harper to begin. "Mr. Davis, can you describe your encounter with Officer Harkins from your perspective?" Marcus's voice was steady. "I was at the park, enjoying my day off, when Officer Harkins approached me. He was aggressive from the start, demanding to see my ID and questioning me like I was already guilty of something. I tried to explain that I was an FBI agent, that there must have been some mistake, but he didn't listen. He cuffed me, pushed me to the ground, and treated me like a criminal." Brian flinched at Marcus's words, but he remained silent, his gaze fixed on the table in front of him. Harper continued, "Did you feel that Officer Harkins's actions were influenced by your race?" Marcus didn't hesitate. "Absolutely. I could see it in his eyes, the way he looked at me, the assumptions he made before I even had a chance to speak. I've dealt with this kind of thing before, but it's different when it comes from someone who's supposed to protect and serve." Bennett could see the impact of Marcus's words on Brian, the way his shoulders slumped slightly, the way he seemed to shrink into himself. But still, Brian said nothing. "Thank you, Mr. Davis," Bennett said. "I appreciate your honesty." Marcus nodded, then stood to leave. As he reached the door, he paused and turned back to Brian. "I don't hold any personal grudges, Officer Harkins, but I hope you can take this as an opportunity to learn, to understand the impact of your actions. It's not just about what you intended. It's about how those intentions play out in the real world." With that, Marcus left the room, leaving a heavy silence. Bennett looked at Brian, who was still staring at the table. "Brian, this investigation isn't just about finding out what happened. It's about making sure it doesn't happen again. We have to do better, for the people who serve and for ourselves." Brian nodded slowly, but there was no fight left in him. The weight of the evidence, the words of Marcus Davis, and the reality of his actions were all starting to sink in. But whether or not he was ready to fully confront that truth remained to be seen. "Take the rest of the day, Brian," Bennett said quietly. "We'll reconvene tomorrow." Brian stood, his movements stiff, and left the office without another word. As the door closed behind him, Bennett felt a heavy sense of responsibility settle on her shoulders. This investigation was just the beginning. There was still much work to be done, both within the department and beyond. But for now, all she could do was continue to piece together the truth and hope that it would lead to real change. Captain Laura Bennett sat in her office, the final report of the investigation lying closed on her desk. The conclusion was clear, and the decision had been made. But that didn't make the task ahead any easier. She glanced at the clock, knowing Marcus Davis would be arriving soon. The conversation they were about to have felt like a turning point, not just for Brian Harkins, but for the entire department. A soft knock at the door signaled Marcus's arrival. Bennett stood and smoothed the front of her uniform, preparing herself for the conversation. "Come in," she called. The door opened and Marcus entered, his expression calm and composed as usual. He gave Bennett a polite nod before taking a seat across from her. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Davis," Bennett began, sitting down as well. "Of course," Marcus replied, his tone steady. "I assume the investigation is complete?" "It is," Bennett confirmed, leaning forward slightly. After reviewing all the evidence, the witness statements, the body cam footage, and the interviews, it's been decided that Officer Harkins will be terminated from his position. Marcus nodded slowly, taking in the information. "I appreciate the thoroughness of the investigation, Captain, but I have to ask, do you believe this decision will lead to real change within the department?" Bennett paused, choosing her words carefully. "I believe it's a step in the right direction. Brian Harkins' actions were unacceptable, and his termination sends a clear message that racial profiling and the abuse of power will not be tolerated. But I also know that firing one officer isn't enough to address the deeper issues at play." Marcus's gaze remained steady as he replied, "You're right. This is about more than one officer. It's about the culture within the department, the training officers receive, and the biases that can influence their decisions in the field. If we don't address those underlying factors, incidents like this will keep happening." Bennett nodded, appreciating Marcus's candor. "I agree. This incident has brought to light the need for systemic change, and I'm committed to making that happen. We're already working on revising our training programs to include more comprehensive education on racial bias and de-escalation techniques. We're also planning to implement more rigorous oversight and accountability measures." "That's a good start," Marcus said, a hint of approval in his voice. "But it's going to take more than just policy changes. It's about changing the mindset of the officers, helping them understand the impact their actions have on the communities they serve. That's not something that can be achieved overnight." "I know," Bennett admitted. "It's going to be a long and difficult process, but it's necessary if we want to rebuild trust and ensure that what happened to you doesn't happen to someone else." Marcus leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "I've been in law enforcement long enough to know that change doesn't come easy, especially when it involves confronting uncomfortable truths. But I'm willing to work with you, Captain, to help make those changes. This isn't just about me. It's about creating a safer, more just system for everyone." Bennett felt a surge of respect for Marcus. Despite everything he had been through, he was still willing to engage, to push for the reforms that were so desperately needed. "I appreciate that, Mr. Davis," Bennett said sincerely. "Your experience and insight will be invaluable as we move forward, and I want you to know that your voice will be heard." Marcus nodded. "Thank you, Captain. I'm not looking for any special treatment. I just want to make sure that this department becomes the best version of itself. That's what the community deserves, and that's what the officers deserve too." Bennett couldn't agree more. "You're right, and I promise you we're committed to making that happen." The room fell into a comfortable silence for a moment, both of them reflecting on the weight of the conversation. The decision to fire Brian Harkins was just the beginning. The real work lay ahead, in the reforms and the cultural shift that would be necessary to prevent future injustices. As Marcus stood to leave, Bennett rose as well, extending her hand. "Thank you again, Mr. Davis. I look forward to working with you." Marcus shook her hand firmly. "Likewise, Captain. Let's make sure this is a turning point, not just a momentary reaction." With that, Marcus left the office, leaving Bennett alone with her thoughts. She glanced at the closed investigation report on her desk one last time before turning her attention to the future. The decision had been made, but now it was up to her and the department to ensure that it led to real and lasting change. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, filled with resistance and challenges, but Bennett was ready. This was about more than just one officer, more than just one incident. It was about doing what was right, no matter how hard that might be. With renewed determination, Bennett reached for her phone and began making the calls that would set the reforms in motion. The department needed to evolve, and she would do everything in her power to make sure it did. The morning was overcast as Marcus Davis walked up the steps of the precinct. The air felt heavy, like the city itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Inside, the atmosphere was tense but charged with a sense of anticipation. The changes Captain Bennett had promised were starting to take shape, but there was still a long road ahead. As Marcus entered the building, he noticed the subtle shifts in the environment. A new bulletin board near the entrance displayed information about upcoming workshops on racial bias and de-escalation techniques. Officers moved through the halls with a different energy, their conversations quieter, more serious. The events of the past few weeks had left an indelible mark on everyone. Marcus made his way to Captain Bennett's office, nodding politely to the officers he passed. Some returned the gesture with respect, while others avoided his gaze, still grappling with the fallout of what had happened. When he reached Bennett's office, he found the door slightly ajar. He knocked softly before pushing it open. "Come in," Bennett called, looking up from her desk. Marcus stepped inside, closing the door behind him. Bennett rose from her chair and offered him a warm smile. "Good to see you again, Mr. Davis." "Likewise, Captain," Marcus replied, taking a seat across from her. "I wanted to see how things were progressing." Bennett nodded, her expression serious but determined. "We're making headway. The new training programs are being rolled out, and we're implementing stricter oversight to ensure accountability. It's a start, but there's still a lot of work to be done." Marcus appreciated her honesty. "Change takes time, but it's encouraging to see the steps you are taking. How's the department handling it?" "There's been some pushback," Bennett admitted. "Not everyone is on board, but most of the officers understand that these changes are necessary. We've had a few difficult conversations, but I'm hopeful that we're moving in the right direction." Marcus leaned forward slightly, his gaze intent. "That's good to hear. It's important to keep the momentum going, to make sure these changes are more than just a response to one incident." "Agreed," Bennett said. "This is about building a new foundation for how we operate, one that's rooted in fairness and respect for everyone we serve." As they spoke, the door to the office opened again, and Brian Harkins stepped inside. His face was drawn, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. He was dressed in plain clothes, a cardboard box in his hands. It was clear he was here to collect the last of his belongings. "Captain," Brian greeted Bennett stiffly, avoiding eye contact with Marcus. "Brian," Bennett replied, her tone neutral. For a moment, the room was silent, the air thick with unresolved tension. Brian finally turned to Marcus, his expression tight. "Mr. Davis, I just wanted to say, I didn't mean for things to turn out like this." Marcus met his gaze calmly. "It's not about what you meant, Officer Harkins. It's about what you did and the impact it had. Intentions don't excuse actions." Brian flinched at the bluntness of Marcus's words, but he nodded, accepting the truth. "I know, I don't know how to fix this." "You can start by acknowledging the problem," Marcus said evenly. "We all have biases, but it's how we deal with them that matters. You have the opportunity to learn from this, to become a better person because of it." Brian's shoulders slumped slightly, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He turned back to Bennett, his voice barely above a whisper. "I suppose this is it then." Bennett nodded, her expression softening. "It doesn't have to be the end, Brian. You can still choose to grow from this, to make changes in your life. But that's up to you." Brian stood there for a moment, as if considering her words, before giving a brief nod. "I'll think about it." He paused, then added, "Good luck, Captain. And to you as well, Mr. Davis." With that, Brian turned and left the office, the door closing behind him with a soft click. Bennett and Marcus watched him go, both lost in their thoughts. "Do you think he'll be okay?" Marcus asked after a moment. Bennett sighed, leaning back in her chair. "I hope so. But it's out of our hands now. All we can do is focus on the work in front of us. Marcus nodded in agreement, and there's plenty of that. They sat in silence for a few moments, the weight of their conversation hanging in the air. Finally, Marcus stood, extending his hand to Bennett. "Thank you for everything, Captain. I appreciate your commitment to making things right." Bennett shook his hand firmly. "Thank you, Mr. Davis. Your involvement has been invaluable. We're in this together." With that, Marcus turned and left the office, making his way through the precinct one last time. As he walked down the halls, he could feel the eyes of the officers on him, some curious, some contemplative. He knew that change wouldn't come easily, but he also knew that it was necessary. The events of the past few weeks had opened a door, and it was up to all of them to walk through it. As Marcus stepped out into the cool morning air, he took a deep breath, feeling a sense of resolve settle over him. The path ahead would be challenging, but he was ready to continue the fight for justice. This was just the beginning, and he was determined to see it through. With renewed determination, Marcus walked away from the precinct, his mind already turning to the next steps in his work. There was so much more to be done, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a glimmer of hope. Change was coming, and he would be there to help guide it every step of the way.
"You ain't nothing but an old white man hiding behind your money." The insult had come not from a rival or a critic, but from a 6-year-old black girl in a worn dress, standing boldly with her fists clenched. Richard Coleman, the billionaire in the tailored navy suit, turned sharply toward her, his brow furrowed. "What did you just say to me?" His voice carried the weight of command, the disbelief of a man unaccustomed to being challenged. Anna lifted her chin higher. "You don't care about us. My mama's sick and you drink wine that costs more than our rent. You act like some hero, but you ain't." Gasps rose from the crowd. A woman in pearls whispered, "This is outrageous." Another man muttered, "Who let a child in here?" Vanessa, Richard's fiancée, clutched his arm with a dramatic flourish. "Richard, don't listen to this nonsense. Security, remove her at once." Mark Stevens, Richard's bodyguard, stepped forward. "Sir, let's get you away from her. This could be dangerous." But Richard raised a hand, his eyes fixed on Anna, his jaw tightened, his cheeks burning. "Little girl, do you have any idea who you're speaking to? This isn't the place for your tantrums. Go back to your mother." Anna's voice trembled, but she shouted louder, so every ear could hear. "You're not listening. That drink, it's not safe." Richard shook his head, exhaling through his nose. Ridiculous. What could a child possibly know about this wine? His tone was sharp, dismissive. But deep down, a flicker of unease stirred. Before anyone could move, Anna darted forward. Her small shoe struck the stem of his glass. The crystal slipped from Richard's hand, spinning into the air before shattering against the marble floor. Red wine spread in a dark pool across the white stone. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Richard roared, his voice booming. The guests gasped, a chorus of shock echoing under the chandeliers. Vanessa shrieked, "She's insane!" 2 guards rushed to grab Anna. She kicked and struggled, crying, "Don't let him drink it. Please, don't let him drink it." Before Richard could order her taken away, a sharp bark cut through the chaos. A small terrier, loose from the backstage, scampered to the spilled wine. Its nose twitched. In a heartbeat, the dog lapped at the crimson liquid. Seconds later, the terrier convulsed, foam spilling from its mouth. The room fell silent as the animal collapsed at Richard's feet. That little dog never stood a chance, and yet its sacrifice revealed the truth no one wanted to see. And in that moment, Anna's voice, ignored and dismissed, became impossible to deny. If you felt the weight of that moment, if your heart went out to the child and the dog, drop a number 1 the comments. Don't forget to like this story and subscribe to the channel for more powerful tales that remind us why truth and courage matter. Richard's face blanched. He staggered a step back, his voice dropping low, heavy with dread. Dear God, it was poisoned. Mark seized his arm firmly. "Sir, don't touch anything. Stay back." Richard's eyes swept from the lifeless dog to the trembling little girl still in the guard's hold. His voice was hoarse now, stripped of certainty. You knew?" Anna's tearful voice cracked as she answered. "It was meant for you." And in that instant, Richard Coleman, the man who thought he owned every room he entered, felt his power slip away, replaced by fear that chilled him to the bone. Richard's heart was hammering in his chest, louder than the gasps filling the grand hall. The shattered glass lay at his feet, crimson wine spreading like a bloodstain on white marble, and the little terrier's body still, lifeless. A smear of foam at its mouth was proof enough that this was no accident. For a moment, the billionaire, who had stood at podiums before presidents and kings, felt utterly stripped bare. He could not speak. He could not even breathe. "Sir, step back," Mark Stevens barked, his bodyguard instincts taking control. His broad frame moved between Richard and the scene, one hand pushing him behind, the other motioning sharply to the guards still holding Anna. "Don't let anyone touch that floor. Nobody." Voices erupted at once. "Good Lord, that poor dog," cried an elderly woman in a sequined shawl. "Poison?" a senator murmured, his face pale. Someone else hissed, "This is going to ruin everything." Guests stumbled back, pressing napkins to their mouths, as if they too might be struck down. Vanessa's cry cut over the noise. "This child is dangerous. She's making a scene." She attacked Richard. She clung to his arm, but Richard pulled it free, his eyes narrowing as he stared at the stain on the floor. The warmth of alcohol should have risen from it, yet he thought he detected something sharper beneath, something foul. Anna twisted in the guard's grip, her small face wet with tears, but her voice rose above the crowd. "I told you, I saw the man. I saw the bottle with the blue mark. It was for him." She jerked her chin toward Richard, her little chest heaving. "Silence her," Belinda, the event manager, snapped, her polished composure fraying. "Get her out of here before the press sees." Her clipboard shook in her hand, and for the first time her voice betrayed fear. Richard's eyes darted to the cameras lining the hall. Flashes popped, catching his every move, freezing the moment forever. He felt their hunger, the reporters pressing closer, microphones thrust like spears. If he dismissed this as a child's tantrum, and it was true, his reputation would die with him. If he admitted it, the gala would collapse in scandal. But then he looked again at the terrier, its body curled unnaturally still, and the decision became less about reputation and more about survival. His voice, usually calm and measured, cut across the hall with steel. "No one leaves." The words dropped like stone into water. A hush fell, broken only by whispers. Mark's face tightened in approval. "You heard him," he barked at the guards by the doors. "Seal the exits. Nobody out." "What?" A congressman puffed up in outrage. "You can't hold us like prisoners." "This is insane," Vanessa shrieked, her eyes darting nervously. Richard turned, his face pale but resolute. "Someone here just tried to kill me. You will wait until security investigates," his voice carried, leaving no room for debate. Anna's small body trembled in the guard's grip, but her dark eyes never left his. For the first time, Richard truly saw her not just a disruptive child, but the only person who had spoken before disaster struck. "Let her go," he said quietly. "Sir?" One guard hesitated. "I said let her go." Hands released her shoulders. Anna stumbled forward, her eyes wide. A mixture of fear and stubborn courage. She wiped her face with the back of her hand, smearing her tears. Richard bent slightly, ignoring the whispers around him. "How did you know?" he asked, his voice low, meant only for her. Anna swallowed hard. "I saw him. A man gave money to the wine man. He touched the bottle with the blue mark. I knew it wasn't right." The billionaire's stomach twisted. He had built an empire on numbers and contracts, but here was a child who had seen what no one else had. His voice faltered. "And you? You chose to embarrass me, to insult me, just to stop me from drinking it?" Her lip quivered. "If I didn't, you'd be dead." The words pierced deeper than any insult. Richard straightened, his jaw set. "Mark," he ordered. "Find that bottle. The one with the blue mark." "Yes, sir." Mark's stride was purposeful, his hand already at his earpiece. Within moments, 2 security men disappeared behind the bar. Guests shifted uneasily, whispering, their glittering finery suddenly ridiculous against the stench of fear. Vanessa forced a brittle laugh. "This is madness, Richard. It was just spoiled wine. Nothing more." This little brat, she's making you look foolish. Richard turned on her, his voice icy. Enough. A dog just died at my feet. His words silenced her, though her eyes burned with something sharp. Something she quickly masked behind a trembling lip. Minutes stretched. Then Mark returned, a bottle in hand, its neck marked with a faint blue sticker nearly invisible beneath the light. Murmurs rippled through the hall. God above, someone whispered. Richard felt his chest tighten. He looked at Anna again. The child stood small, ragged, defiant, her hand gripping the hem of her dress. For the first time, he believed her. Fear prickled along his spine. If not for her, the marble floor might be holding his body instead of the dog's. Test it, Richard ordered. Mark gave a curt nod, already signaling the venue's head of security. Guests backed farther away, forming clusters of anxious eyes. The quartet in the corner had fallen silent, their instruments hanging uselessly at their sides. The test kit arrived swiftly, pulled from the emergency case kept for high-profile events. A swab of the spilled wine turned the indicator strip, a vivid crimson. Gasps filled the hall. The evidence was undeniable. Richard exhaled, his hand brushing over his jaw, still burning with the sting of the girl's words. His voice was low, more to himself than anyone else. She saved my life. Oh, Anna blinked, her lashes wet. I only said what I had to. The hall had become a cage of suspicion. Eyes flickered from the child to the bottle, to Richard, to one another. Somewhere among them stood those who had plotted his death, and for the first time in his long career, Richard Coleman felt the sharp weight of betrayal closing in from within his own world. The hall had turned into a theater of fear. Every chandelier sparkled, but instead of elegance, the light now cast sharp, merciless shadows on anxious faces. Whispers surged like waves crashing against marble walls. Nobody touched their glasses. Nobody laughed. The glitter of gowns and tuxedos looked hollow under the weight of suspicion. Richard stood rooted, his hand pressed against the edge of the podium. His pulse drummed in his ears. Though his face remained as composed as years of business battles had taught him, he looked down at Anna, the little girl who had shattered his wine glass, and in doing so, shattered the illusion of safety that had cocooned his life. Sir, Mark murmured close to his ear, we need to move you out. Now. Too many unknowns here. Richard shook his head. His voice was firm, though lower than usual. If we leave, they'll scatter. Whoever planned this will vanish into the night. No, not until we know. Anna tugged lightly at the hem of his jacket. She stood only to his waist, her big eyes red from tears, yet her voice carried a clarity that silenced even the whispers nearby. They wanted you gone. Somebody here. Somebody close. The words, too blunt for diplomacy, made several guests stiffen. A few heads turned sharply toward her, then away, as if even looking at the child might brand them guilty. Vanessa broke the tension with a sharp, nervous laugh. Really, Richard, are you going to take the word of a child over your entire board of directors and distinguished guests? She laid a hand on his chest, her diamond ring flashing in the light. This whole thing is a misunderstanding. Let's not humiliate ourselves further. Richard's jaw tightened. He gently pushed her hand away. A dog just died from the drink meant for me. That's no misunderstanding. His voice rang across the hall, cold and steady. The guests shifted uncomfortably under his gaze. Belinda, the event manager, stepped forward, her clipboard clutched tight against her chest. Mr. Coleman, perhaps it was just contamination in storage. The wine came from our regular distributor. I'll call them right away. Mark cut her off sharply. You'll do nothing until security clears you. Everyone here is under watch. His eyes scanned the crowd, hard as stone. The tension was suffocating. A senator whispered to his aide. A CEO dabbed sweat from his forehead. The air smelled faintly of roses and fear. Richard crouched slightly, lowering his face to Anna's level. His voice softened, though it trembled at the edges. Tell me exactly what you saw. Anna hesitated, clutching her small hands together. The crowd's eyes pressed against her like weights. She swallowed. I saw a man with a hat. He gave money to the wine man. The wine man looked scared. He put a blue mark on the bottle. That's the one they gave you. Make so. Richard straightened, his mind racing. A bribe. A marked bottle. A sommelier complicit or coerced. Pieces of betrayal fitting into place. Mark's voice snapped through the hall. Find the sommelier. Now. 2 guards moved swiftly, vanishing into the service hallway. The tension thickened. A glass slipped from a nervous hand at one of the tables, shattering on the floor and making half the guests jump. Vanessa's voice hissed near Richard's ear. This is madness. You're letting a child dictate the evening. You'll look paranoid. Think of your reputation. Richard turned on her with a glare colder than ice. My reputation doesn't matter if I'm dead. The words dropped like lead. Vanessa recoiled, her mouth snapping shut. Moments later, the guards returned, dragging Santo the sommelier by the arm. His vest was rumpled, his face pale, sweat slick on his temples. He struggled, shaking his head, but Mark shoved him into the open space before Richard. Tell him, one guard growled. Santo's lips trembled. I don't know what you mean. It was just wine. Just wine. His eyes darted, wild, searching for someone in the crowd. Anna pointed, her little hand steady. That's him. That's the man who touched the bottle with the blue mark. The room gasped as if struck. Richard's eyes bore into Santo. His voice was quiet, more dangerous than shouting. You served me poison. No, I was told I didn't have a choice. Santo's knees buckled, his words spilling out in a rush. I have a family. They threatened me. Said they'd hurt my son if I didn't cooperate. I didn't want to, I swear. But I couldn't stop it. The crowd buzzed, horrified. Belinda paled, her hand shaking so violently she nearly dropped her clipboard. Vanessa looked away, her lips pressed thin. Richard's fury surged, but beneath it a heavy sadness pulled at him. Betrayal, forced or willing, had walked into his house, his foundation. His voice cracked like a whip. Who paid you? Who gave you that order? Santo's gaze darted again across the room. His lips parted, but no name came out. He shook his head violently. If I say, they'll kill us all. The fear in his eyes was genuine, and it chilled Richard more than poison itself. Whoever was behind this was close. Very close. Mark signaled the guards to restrain Santo. We'll get it out of him, he promised grimly. Richard turned back to the room, his face carved in stone. Tonight, someone here tried to murder me. And if not for this child, he gestured toward Anna, who stood trembling but unbowed. They might have succeeded. You may all be guests, but until I know who betrayed me, you are suspects. The silence that followed was absolute. Anna reached for his sleeve, her voice a whisper only he heard. You believe me now? Richard looked down at her, his eyes heavy with the weight of the truth. Yes, Anna, he said softly. I believe you. The applause of cameras snapped again, freezing the moment. The billionaire and the little girl, the poisoned wine, the corpse of a dog, and a hall of powerful people suddenly turned into suspects. And Richard Coleman, who once believed himself untouchable, now felt the invisible noose of treachery tightening around his neck. The glitter of the gala had soured into something darker. A carnival of suspicion where every glance was a weapon. Guests who had arrived eager to rub shoulders with power now pressed into corners, whispering and staring at the little girl who had thrown the night into chaos. Anna stood close to Richard, her thin shoulders squared though her chin trembled. In the middle of all the silk gowns and polished shoes, she looked like a sparrow that had flown into a ballroom. Yet Richard knew without her, he would be dead. Mark's voice rumbled like thunder as he barked orders to the guards. Check every exit. No one slips away. Search the catering rooms. Every staff member accounted for. His authority was absolute. And for once, even the wealthiest guests obeyed. Richard scanned the crowd, his chest heavy. Familiar faces blurred into masks of fear. There was Senator Harlow, pale and sweaty. There was Franklin Reese, the banker, nervously twisting his wedding ring. There was his own fiancée, Vanessa, pacing near the stage, fury burning just beneath her porcelain smile, and Belinda, the event manager, wringing her hands so hard her knuckles gleamed white. Which one of them had wanted him gone badly enough to poison his glass? Vanessa swept back toward him, her voice pitched high enough for all to hear. Richard, this circus has gone too far. You cannot seriously believe someone in this hall would try to murder you. Her eyes flicked toward Anna, sharp as knives. All of this because of a child's tantrum? Anna stepped forward before Richard could speak. It wasn't a tantrum. I saved him. Her little voice cracked, but she planted her feet like a soldier. Guests gasped, some in pity, others in annoyance. Richard placed a hand gently on her shoulder. His voice cut clean through the air. She is the only reason I'm standing here. You'd do well to remember that. For the first time, Vanessa faltered. She opened her mouth, then snapped it shut, her nostrils flaring. Mark returned with 2 guards who held a tray of wine bottles. All identical except one, its neck marked with that faint blue sticker. He set it on the podium before Richard, like evidence in a trial. This is it. We need the lab to confirm. But the field test doesn't lie. Cyanide derivative. A ripple of horror swept the hall. Senator Harlow muttered a prayer under his breath. Franklin Reese cursed softly. Richard stared at the bottle, his reflection warped in the glass. He remembered lifting the poisoned wine only moments ago, remembered Anna's tiny shoe knocking it away. A shiver ran through him. If I had taken one sip. His voice broke off. Anna tugged at his sleeve, her whisper steady. That's why I had to make you mad. It was the only way you'd stop. His throat tightened. She was 6 years old. And she had already carried a choice heavier than most men ever faced. Belinda stepped forward suddenly, her voice desperate. Mr. Coleman, surely this proves it was just a rogue staff member, maybe some outsider who slipped in. Please don't let this ruin your night, your reputation. Richard turned, his eyes narrowing. Ruin my night? A dog lies dead at my feet. My life was nearly stolen. And you speak of reputation? His voice rose, and the weight of his fury silenced her instantly. From the corner of the hall came a cry. One of the guards dragging Santo, the sommelier, had tightened his grip. Santo was sobbing now, his face streaked with sweat and tears. I didn't want to do it. They made me. They said they'd kill my boy if I didn't pour from that bottle. His voice cracked like glass. Richard strode forward. Who? Who gave the order? Santo shook his head violently. His eyes darted to the guests, then dropped. I can't. They're too powerful. Mark grabbed him by the vest. You'll talk, or you'll answer to more than your conscience. Panic surged through the room. The guests murmured louder, fear crawling up their spines. They had all come to celebrate charity, to bask in wealth's glow. Now they were trapped in a murder plot, and any one of them might be the traitor. Richard raised his voice, every syllable like stone. You will not leave until we know the truth. If there is a traitor in this room, we will uncover them tonight. Anna stood at his side, clutching the hem of his jacket. She whispered softly, You can't trust anyone here. He looked down at her. In her eyes he saw not childish imagination but hard truth. She had risked everything to stop him from drinking. She had forced the room to see what they didn't want to, and for the first time in years, Richard Coleman felt the floor shift under him. Power, money, reputation, none of it mattered in this moment. Only survival, only truth. He straightened, his voice echoing under the chandeliers. Whoever did this, hear me clearly. You tried to silence me, you failed, and I swear before everyone in this hall I will find you. The room fell into a hushed dread. Somewhere in the crowd, Richard knew. The guilty one stood very still, hiding in plain sight. And the hunt had just begun. The gala had transformed into a storm-tossed ship, drifting in fear and accusation. The chandeliers sparkled above, but no one admired them now. People clutched their purses tighter, shifted nervously in polished shoes, and avoided each other's eyes as though a glance could condemn them. The music had stopped, the laughter had died, and only the low hum of frightened voices filled the grand hall. Richard Coleman stood at the center like a captain steering through the chaos. His back was straight, his face carved into grim lines. But inside, his thoughts raced. Who would want him dead? Who had the power to reach so close without raising alarm? Mark, ever the soldier, kept scanning the room. His hand rested at the small of his back where his concealed weapon lay. His voice was steady when he addressed Richard. "Sir, we need to start isolating. Staff first, guests next. The longer this crowd sits together, the more panic grows." Richard nodded, his gaze shifting to Anna. The child stood quietly at his side, small hands gripping the folds of his jacket. Despite her size, her presence anchored him more than the gold-plated walls or the guards flanking the doors. She had been the only one to act when everyone else ignored the signs. The crowd stirred as two guards pushed Santo, the sommelier, forward again. His face was blotchy, his vest damp with sweat. He stumbled to his knees, babbling, "I had no choice. Please, Mr. Coleman. Please, I swear I didn't want to. They said my boy would never come home if I refused." "What was I supposed to do? Tell me who threatened you," Richard demanded. His voice sharp but not without pity. Santo's eyes darted wildly across the room. I can't say. If I do, it won't just be me. They'll kill us all." The guests erupted again, their voices a mixture of horror and indignation. "Kill us all?" repeated a banker with a trembling voice. "This is insanity." Vanessa's shrill tone pierced through the murmur. "Richard, this is beneath you. Let security handle it. You are humiliating yourself in front of donors and politicians." Her eyes flashed, her hand gripping his arm as though she could steer him back into silence. But Richard pulled free. His voice boomed across the room. "Do you think I care about humiliation? Tonight someone tried to take my life. This is no longer about charity, no longer about appearances. It's about the truth." The guests recoiled as though struck. Some looked to Vanessa, hoping she would calm him, but her perfect mask faltered. For the first time that evening, her smile was gone. Anna stepped forward, her little voice clear. "He's alive because of me. You should all be glad I made him mad." She turned her face upward to Richard, eyes fierce despite the tears still drying on her cheeks. "Don't let them trick you. Somebody here wanted you gone." A stunned silence followed her words. For all her size, her voice landed heavier than any accusation from an adult. Belinda, the event manager, tried to step into the gap. Her voice trembled despite her attempt at poise. "Mr. Coleman, if I may, this venue is secure. There must be some mix-up, some contaminated shipment. We can get answers from the supplier tomorrow." Mark cut her short, his voice thunderous. "Tomorrow may be too late. We find answers now." At that moment, one of the guards returned from the catering wing. "Sir," he said, holding a crumpled napkin. "We found this stuffed in the trash near the service entrance. Same blue mark as the bottle. Somebody was covering their tracks." A chill swept the room. People drew back as though poison might leap from the cloth itself. Richard's voice dropped to a deadly calm. "They're here among us. The person who ordered my death is standing in this room." His eyes swept the hall, locking briefly on each face. He watched their reactions, averted eyes, forced calm, outright fear. Vanessa pressed her hands together, her voice soft but edged. "Darling, you're frightening everyone. This is not how a leader behaves." Richard's gaze flicked to her, colder than ice. "A leader protects his people, Vanessa, even if it means frightening them." Anna's small hand slipped into his. He looked down, startled by the simple touch. Her voice was low, for him alone. "They're scared because they're guilty, or because they know something." Her words struck deep. She was right. Fear revealed truth faster than any test. Mark gestured toward the guards. "We'll start interviewing, one by one. No one leaves until we've questioned them all." The crowd groaned, protests rising. But Richard silenced them with a raised hand. His voice, low and iron-hard, carried to every corner. This gala was meant to celebrate hope. Instead, it revealed betrayal. If you are innocent, you have nothing to fear. But if you are guilty— He let the pause stretch, heavy and suffocating. You will be found. Anna squeezed his hand tighter, her eyes wide. For the first time, she whispered something that chilled him more than the poison itself. Mr. Coleman, what if the one who wants you dead is someone you already trust? Richard's eyes moved once more across the glittering hall, and for the first time that night, true dread rooted itself in his heart. The air inside the Manhattan Foundation Hall was no longer elegant, it was suffocating. The clink of glasses and hum of polite laughter had been replaced by murmurs, coughs, and the restless shuffle of expensive shoes against marble. People who once mingled like old friends now stood apart, divided into little islands of suspicion. Richard Coleman stood tall at the podium, his eyes scanning the crowd with the precision of a man used to reading boardrooms. But this was no boardroom. This was a trap, and someone here had baited it with poison. Anna stayed close to him, her small hand still wrapped around his. To the guests, she was just a ragged 6-year-old who didn't belong. But to Richard, she was suddenly the only one he could trust. Mark Stevens's voice broke the tension. All right, listen up. The bodyguard's tone cracked like a whip. We're taking names. Each of you will step forward. You'll be searched, questioned, and cleared or not. Until then, no one leaves this room. The protests erupted instantly. This is outrageous. Senator Harlow's face had gone beet red. You can't treat us like criminals. Franklin Reese, the banker, sputtered, his silk tie askew. This will destroy your reputation, Richard, Vanessa cried, her eyes glinting sharp beneath her painted lashes. Your donors will never forgive you for this humiliation. Richard lifted a hand, silencing them with the sheer force of his presence. My reputation means nothing compared to the truth. Tonight, someone tried to kill me. If I have to lose friends and donors to survive, so be it. The hall fell quiet again, but the silence was brittle, like ice ready to crack. The guards moved among the guests, collecting handbags, phones, and coats. The glitter of wealth looked pitiful now. Diamond clutches, engraved cufflinks, silk shawls, all stacked like evidence. Mark directed each person forward, eyes sharp as steel. Anna tugged at Richard's sleeve. They're scared, she whispered. Some of them are scared for the wrong reason. He looked down at her, his face softening just for an instant. How do you know? Her small shoulders lifted in a shrug. I've seen that look before, back home. When kids do something bad, they try too hard to look normal. That's how you know. Her words unsettled him. How could a child see so clearly what adults missed? One by one, the guests were brought forward. Some grumbled, others wept. Others tried to bluff with jokes that fell flat. Each denial added fuel to the fire of Richard's doubt. He didn't know who to believe anymore. When Belinda, the event manager, stepped up, her clipboard still clutched like a shield, Richard studied her carefully. You managed this entire event, he said coldly. Explain how a poisoned bottle slipped past you. Belinda's voice shook. I don't know, sir. The suppliers are vetted. The staff is background checked. I oversaw every delivery myself. I swear I had no idea. Mark's eyes narrowed. And yet, somehow, a marked bottle ended up on your serving table. Belinda's hands trembled, the clipboard rattling like dry bones. Please, Mr. Coleman, I've worked every gala for 10 years. I would never— Richard cut her off. Would never? Or could never admit? The crowd shifted uneasily. Anna stared at Belinda with the quiet intensity of a child who sensed cracks in the mask. She whispered softly to Richard. She's lying about something. Richard's jaw clenched. He didn't press further, not yet. But he tucked the thought away like a knife. Next came Vanessa. She swept forward with a theatrical sigh, her gown glittering, her chin high. Richard, this has gone far enough. These theatrics are beneath you. You are a statesman, a philanthropist, a leader. Don't let paranoia turn you into a fool. Richard's gaze was cold. Then you have nothing to fear by answering my question. Did you know about this? Her eyes widened, her hand flying to her chest. "How dare you even suggest it? I'm your fiancé, and yet you've spent more time tonight worried about photographs than about my life." His words sliced. Gasps rippled through the hall. Vanessa's face flushed crimson, but she forced a brittle laugh. Anna stepped forward, her small voice startling in its courage. "If she really cared about you, she wouldn't be so worried about herself." The room stilled. Vanessa's lips curled, her eyes narrowing at the child. "You insolent little brat." "Enough," Richard snapped. "This is not about her feelings. It's about the truth." Mark gestured for Vanessa to step back. Reluctantly, she did, though her eyes never left Anna, burning with quiet fury. Hours seemed to stretch into minutes as the questioning continued. Yet the answers were thin, the lies slick. Richard felt as though he were drowning in half-truths. Then, at the far end of the hall, a guard returned with grim news. "Sir, we checked the service corridor cameras. Someone tampered with the feed. There's a 15-minute blackout right when the poison bottle was delivered." Richard's stomach dropped. This wasn't random. It was coordinated. Planned. Anna's small voice carried again, sharper this time. "That means it wasn't just the wine man. Somebody else helped him." Her words were simple, but they hit harder than any accusation. Eyes turned, suspicions deepened. Whispers sharpened like knives. Richard knew this was no longer just about one bottle of wine. It was about betrayal, rooted deep in his circle, in his foundation. He scanned the faces around him, people he had trusted, people he had raised money with, broken bread with. And he realized with a cold certainty, one of them wanted him dead. "Lock down the building," he ordered, his voice final. "Until I know who did this, no one leaves." The guests groaned, fear shifting into anger. But Richard no longer cared. Anna's hand tightened around his. Her whisper rose once more, steady and sure. "You're not alone. I'll help you find them." For the first time that night, Richard felt something unexpected, not just fear, but resolve. The little girl at his side had already saved his life once. Perhaps she was the only ally he truly had left. The ballroom was beginning to feel less like a place of celebration and more like a cage. The doors were locked, the guards stood like statues, and the guests, once resplendent with champagne and laughter, now looked like cornered animals. Tension vibrated in the air, thick enough to choke on. Even the chandeliers seemed to glare down coldly, their brilliance mocking the fear that had overtaken the room. Richard Coleman stood tall, though inside his stomach churned. He had weathered hostile takeovers, political storms, and personal grief, but this was different. This was his life dangling by a thread, with enemies cloaked in familiar faces. Anna stayed glued to his side, her wide eyes unflinching as she studied the people around them. She was small enough to go unnoticed if she wished, but she had already proven she wasn't afraid of notice. She tugged at his sleeve and whispered, "They're all pretending. That's what makes it scary." Richard bent slightly, his voice low. "Which ones?" Anna's gaze swept the room. She pointed subtly toward the banker, Franklin Reese, who was dabbing sweat from his forehead. "He's shaking too much. That's guilt or fear. And her?" She nodded toward Belinda, the event manager. "She keeps looking at the doors, like she wants to run." Richard's eyes followed her quiet observations. He realized she was sharper than most adults in the room. She saw through masks with the raw honesty only a child could wield. Mark returned from his patrol, his voice clipped. "Sir, the feed blackout was deliberate. Whoever did this had access. No outsider could have gotten that close." Richard's heart sank. That meant the betrayer wasn't a stranger slipping in from the street. It was someone in his circle. Someone he had trusted. Senator Harlow erupted suddenly, his voice cracking. "This is outrageous, Richard, to hold us all hostage while you play detective. I demand you release us this instant." Richard's voice was ice. "And if I had drunk that wine, Senator, would you be demanding anything right now?" "Sit down." The senator sputtered, but the steel in Richard's tone silenced him. He slumped back, muttering under his breath. Anna, emboldened, called out with the bluntness of a child. "If you're so mad about staying, maybe you're the one who did it." The room erupted in shocked gasps. Senator Harlow's face turned crimson. "How dare you, you little—" "Watch your words, Senator," Mark cut in, stepping forward like a shield. "You're not above suspicion." For a moment the senator glared, then his eyes darted away, shame or something darker simmering in them. Vanessa, always eager for the stage, seized the moment. "Richard, can't you see this is spiraling? You're letting a child accuse a United States senator. This is madness. Do you want the papers to call you paranoid? Do you want your enemies to laugh at you?" Richard turned, his glare silencing her. "I would rather be called paranoid than buried." Vanessa recoiled as if struck. Belinda, desperate to salvage the evening, stepped forward, her hands twisting her clipboard. "Sir, perhaps we can quietly dismiss the staff, interview them later." "It's too much to subject these guests to quietly dismiss?" Richard's voice cut like a blade. "Do you think I'll let a murderer stroll out of here while I shake hands with donors?" "No, Belinda. Everyone stays." Her face drained of color. Anna piped up again, her voice steady in the heavy silence. "If she wants people to leave so bad, maybe she's scared of what you'll find." All eyes turned on Belinda. She stammered, "That's ridiculous. She's just a child." Richard's jaw tightened. "Sometimes children see what adults try to hide." "Ugh." The crowd stirred, uneasy, their suspicion now spreading like fire. Every face seemed a mask, every smile a threat. At that moment, one of the guards returned with a message. "Sir, the wine delivery records show one case unaccounted for. The manifest says 12 bottles, but only 11 were checked in." The hall buzzed with fresh dread, an entire missing bottle. Proof this was no isolated accident. Anna squeezed Richard's hand tighter. "That means they still have more. They could try again." Her words chilled him. She was right. "Whoever planned this wasn't finished." Mark's voice thundered. "Search every inch of this building. If there's another bottle, we'll find it." As the guards moved, Richard studied the faces around him. Franklin Reese, pale and trembling. Belinda, wringing her hands. Senator Harlow, glaring. Vanessa, smiling too tightly. All of them had reasons, alibis, masks. And any one of them could be the hand that had guided Santo to betray him. Richard's voice filled the room, grim and final. "Listen to me, all of you. Tonight was supposed to be about hope, about giving back. But someone turned it into a night of treachery. You may wear fine clothes and polished smiles. But until I know who tried to end me, you're nothing but suspects. Every one of you." The guests shifted, some with outrage, others with fear. Anna's voice broke the silence, small but piercing. "You said you'll find them. Don't stop till you do." "No." Richard looked down at her, this small girl who had shattered his world yet held it together in the same breath. His chest ached with something he hadn't felt in years. Responsibility not just to lead, but to protect. And as the chandeliers glittered cold above, Richard Coleman swore to himself that he would uncover the traitor before dawn. The Manhattan Foundation Hall was silent enough to hear the faint creak of marble under shifting shoes. The chandeliers sparkled mockingly, their light bouncing off frightened eyes and stiffened shoulders. The gala, once alive with music and champagne, had curdled into a courtroom where everyone stood accused. Richard Coleman, usually calm and deliberate, felt the weight of the moment pressing on his chest. He knew he had enemies in business, in politics, but to be struck here, in a hall filled with supposed allies, unsettled him to his core. And yet, as he looked at the frightened faces before him, he realized his true ally stood barely higher than his waist, a 6-year-old girl who had seen what no one else dared acknowledge. Anna clung to his jacket, her dark eyes scanning the room with uncanny sharpness. Her voice was small but insistent. "They're waiting, Mr. Coleman. Waiting for you to get tired. If you stop looking, they'll win." Richard's lips pressed into a thin line. The child's words echoed truths he couldn't ignore. "I won't stop," he whispered back. "Not tonight." Mark, his loyal bodyguard, moved like a shadow at his side. barking orders to the guards who combed the building for the missing wine bottle. Check the storage rooms. Check every ice bucket, every cart. If it's here, we'll find it. The crowd bristled at every command. Senator Harlow's voice rose again, sharp with indignation. Richard, this is absurd. We are not prisoners. This heavy-handed charade must end at once. Release us before you turn friends into enemies. Richard's eyes cut to him, cold and measured. Perhaps my true enemy is the one most eager to leave. The senator's face darkened. You dare? Anna's voice rang out suddenly, breaking through. Why are you so scared to stay if you didn't do anything? A ripple of gasps moved through the crowd. Adults were not used to being challenged by children. Harlow sputtered. She's just a child. She knows nothing. But Richard's gaze lingered on the man. Anna's instinct had been right before. Could it be again? Vanessa swept forward, her gown glinting under the lights. Her voice dripped with scorn. Richard, are you really going to let this little girl humiliate senators and executives? This is beneath you. You're letting paranoia turn a noble night into a circus. Richard turned slowly, his eyes narrowing. Better a circus than a funeral. The words struck deep, silencing even Vanessa. For the first time, her mask slipped, her jaw tightened, her hands clenched at her sides. Mark returned, his expression grim. Sir, we found another bottle, hidden behind the bar. Same mark, same seal. The room erupted in horrified murmurs. Belinda, the event manager, turned white as chalk. I checked every bottle myself. I swear I did, Anna's sharp voice carried again. But you missed one. Or you didn't want to see it. Belinda's eyes filled with tears. That's not true. I'd never hurt Mr. Coleman. Never. Richard studied her. She looked broken, terrified, but was it guilt or fear of being framed? He couldn't tell. Santo, the sommelier, still restrained by guards, cried out suddenly, his voice ragged. It wasn't just me. I swear it. I was told exactly where to place the bottle. They said I'd be watched the whole time. I wasn't the only one. Mark seized his collar. Who told you? Santo's lips trembled. His eyes darted toward the crowd. Richard followed his gaze, but Santo clamped his mouth shut, shaking his head violently. If I speak, I'm dead. My boy's dead. The guests shifted uneasily, their whispers sharp as knives. Someone in that hall had orchestrated this, and Santo was too frightened to give them away. Richard's patience snapped. His voice thundered through the hall, startling even the guards. Enough lies. I don't care about your excuses. Someone here tried to kill me, and I will find them. You think wealth or titles will protect you? They won't. Tonight, you are nothing but suspects. The silence that followed was suffocating. Anna stepped closer to him, her small face fierce. Then make them show who they are. Richard looked down at her. How? Her eyes, bright and steady, met his. Ask them what they think about you. Not about the poison, about you. The one who hates you the most, that's who did it. The child's logic was blunt, even naive, but it struck Richard like a revelation. In a room where everyone wore masks, hatred might still slip through. He straightened, his voice iron. Very well. If I cannot trust evidence, I will judge by truth of the tongue. Each of you will speak. Here and now. Tell me why you came tonight. And tell me what you truly think of me. If you lie, I'll know. Gasps swept the room. This is madness, Vanessa snapped. No, Richard said, his voice cutting through her protest. This is survival. The guests shifted uneasily, eyes darting. Some looked ready to collapse, others ready to lash out. But one by one, they would speak. And Richard, with Anna's piercing gaze at his side, would listen. He looked at the trembling crowd, then at the little girl who had already seen more truth than most adults dared to. His voice lowered, but carried through the hall with finality. Let's see which of you dares show your face without a mask. Wait. The air in the grand hall was heavy, thicker than the scent of roses that once perfumed the gala. Guests shifted uneasily in their polished shoes, their jewels suddenly worthless compared to the question hanging over all of them. Who wanted Richard Coleman dead? The billionaire's voice had cut through the room like the crack of a gavel. One by one, you'll speak. Tell me why you came tonight. And tell me what you truly think of me. Masks off. No rehearsed speeches. If you lie, I'll know. Gasps had followed. Some muttered angrily, others looked pale as ghosts. But now silence gripped the hall again, broken only by the nervous cough of an elderly senator and the faint whine of the lights overhead. Anna's small hand tugged at Richard's sleeve. Her voice, though soft, was steady. They won't like this. But that's why you have to do it. Richard nodded. She was right. Fear had already spread like wildfire, now he needed to corner it. Mark stepped forward, his voice booming like a drill sergeant. Line up, one at a time. The first to step forward was Franklin Reese, the banker. He wiped sweat from his forehead with a trembling handkerchief. Richard, he began, forcing a shaky smile. I came tonight because I've supported your foundation for years. I respect you. I always have. Anna squinted at him, her brows furrowing. She leaned toward Richard and whispered, He's scared. Too scared. But not mad. He's not the one. Richard studied Franklin's face. The man was a coward. But fear and guilt were not the same thing. He waved him back. Next came Senator Harlow, his chest puffed with self-importance even now. This entire exercise is absurd, he barked. But since you demand it, I came because I was invited. You've always been too idealistic, Coleman, throwing money away on schools and hospitals when you should be strengthening the economy. I don't hate you. But I think you're a fool. Whispers rippled. The senator had said aloud what many had whispered behind closed doors. Richard's jaw tightened. But Anna whispered again, He's mad at you. But not enough to kill. He likes to talk too much. He'd never hide it. Richard gave a curt nod. Next, Belinda, the event manager, came forward clutching her clipboard as if it could shield her. Her voice shook. Mr. Coleman, I came because this gala is my work. I respect you. I do. I would never harm you. Anna tilted her head, studying her. She's scared of losing her job. But she's hiding something else. Not about the poison. About herself. Richard's eyes narrowed. He tucked the thought away. Belinda was not innocent. Even if she wasn't the one with poison in her hands. Vanessa swept forward next. Her gown glittering, her smile polished. Darling, she purred. I came because I am your fiancé. I love you. I admire everything you've done. Surely you don't think I would ever harm you. Anna's little voice rang sharp. She's lying. The guests gasped. Vanessa spun on the child, her face twisting. How dare you? Richard raised a hand, silencing her. He bent toward Anna. Why do you say that? Anna's eyes never left Vanessa. Because her eyes don't match her words. She smiles. But her hands are shaking. She's hiding something, and it's about you. Vanessa hissed. You insolent brat. Enough. Richard's voice thundered. This is not a game. Sit down, Vanessa. Her face flushed crimson, her mask of charm cracking for just a second before she turned sharply, skirts swirling. The line continued. One by one, they spoke donors, executives, socialites. Some offered empty praise, others veiled criticism. Anna whispered her observations each time, sharp and cutting. He's telling the truth. She's scared, but not of you. That one hates you for real. No. Richard found himself listening less to the polished words of the guests and more to the quiet whispers of the girl at his side. Then, as the last guest finished, Mark returned from the far side of the hall. His face was grim. Sir, we searched the west storage, found another empty case. Whoever smuggled those bottles in had help. From inside, the room rippled with dread. Another missing case. Another confirmation this was no random act. Richard looked across the hall. his voice low but carrying like thunder. So it's true. One of you standing here raised a glass to my death. The silence was suffocating. Anna's voice pierced it. She's here. I can feel it. The one who hates you enough is right here. Richard studied the crowd, his chest heavy. He didn't know yet which mask hid the truth, but he knew this. Anna was right. His betrayer stood before him, dressed in wealth and respectability, smiling through poison. His voice dropped, filled with steel. The truth is coming. And when it does, I swear to you all there will be nowhere left to hide. The great hall felt colder now, though the chandeliers still blazed with golden light. Guests shifted uneasily, their expensive shoes tapping nervously against the marble floor. Richard Coleman could feel the storm gathering in his chest. The line of polished men and women, donors and dignitaries, looked less like his allies and more like wolves in formal wear. Somewhere in this room, one of them had planned his death. Anna tugged at his sleeve, her small eyes searching the crowd. She's here, she whispered again, her voice steady despite her age. The one who wants you gone. She's trying hard to look normal. Richard studied the faces before him. Franklin Reese, pale and sweating. Belinda, wringing her hands. Senator Harlow, scowling with indignation. And Vanessa Beautiful, glittering Vanessa, her painted smile trembling at the corners. All of them had masks. Which one hid poison behind it? Mark's voice boomed as he finished reporting. Sir, the second bottle is secured. It was hidden in plain sight, tucked among the catering stock. Someone wanted it close. Accessible. His jaw tightened. This wasn't sloppy. It was planned. Gasps broke the silence. Some guests muttered prayers. Others demanded answers. Richard lifted his hand, silencing them. His eyes burned with fury. Planned. By someone I trusted. Vanessa rushed forward, clutching at his arm, her voice high and desperate. Richard, please, this has gone far enough. You can't accuse everyone you know. It will ruin you. Don't let paranoia destroy everything you've built. Richard pulled away, his glare cutting her to silence. Better paranoia than poison. His voice rang like steel, echoing against the walls. Belinda, trembling, tried to regain control. Mr. Coleman, if I may, we should end the evening now. Quietly. If the press learns of this, the foundation will suffer beyond repair. Surely you don't want... Richard's voice snapped like a whip. Don't speak to me of reputation when my life was nearly stolen tonight. Anna stepped forward, her little voice rising. She keeps saying the same thing, protect the reputation. Maybe that's what she cares about most. Not you. All eyes turned to Belinda. Her face drained of color. She stammered, I just meant... But her voice collapsed under the weight of suspicion. Richard looked down at Anna, her honesty slicing through layers of falsehood. For the second time that night, he realized the child was reading people better than any of his advisors ever had. Mark leaned close. Sir, we need to press harder. Someone cracks tonight, or we risk another attempt. Richard nodded slowly. He stepped forward, facing the crowd. His voice dropped, cold and deliberate. You think this is over? No. Tonight we go deeper. No more polite speeches. No more lies. We've heard your words. Now we'll see your actions. The crowd stirred uneasily. Senator Harlow barked. You have no right. Richard cut him off with a glare. I have every right when someone here tried to put me in a coffin. Anna's eyes darted across the room, then landed on Franklin Reese. She whispered, he's too nervous, like he knows more than he's saying. Richard signaled the guards. Bring Reese forward. The banker stumbled, dabbing sweat from his forehead, his eyes darting. I already told you, Richard. I respect you. I've donated for years. This is ridiculous. Anna interrupted, her small voice sharp. Then why do you keep looking at the doors? Like you want to run. The crowd gasped. Reese froze, his mouth opening and closing. Mark stepped closer, his tone a growl. Answer her. Reese's voice cracked. Because I'm scared. Wouldn't you be scared if you were locked in a room with accusations flying? Richard's eyes bored into him. He saw a coward, maybe corrupt, but not cunning enough for this plot. He waved him back. Not him. Not tonight, Anna whispered again. Then it's someone braver, someone who thinks they're smarter than you. Richard's eyes lifted to Vanessa. Her flawless gown sparkled under the lights, her chin tilted proudly. But her eyes darting, sharp, watchful, betrayed cracks in her performance. His chest tightened. Could it be her? Before he could speak, a commotion broke near the catering wing. A guard hurried forward, his face pale. In his hands he carried a folded napkin stained with wine. Sir, we found this stuffed behind a storage crate. The fabric matches the one that signaled your glass. The hall buzzed. Richard stepped closer, his voice a low growl. Whoever planted this knew exactly which glass was mine. His eyes swept the room. That means it wasn't chance. It was personal. Anna's whisper cut sharp as glass. Then it's someone close to you. The realization hit Richard like a blow. He looked again at the faces he thought he knew. And for the first time, he saw them not as friends or partners, but as suspects in a murder plot. His voice rang cold and final. The mask will slip, and when it does, I promise you the traitor will regret ever setting foot in this hall. The guests flinched, some in fear, some in guilt, and Richard Coleman, standing tall with Anna at his side, knew the night was far from over. The real confrontation had only just begun. The grand hall, once a palace of music and laughter, now felt like a courtroom at midnight. Every rustle of fabric, every cleared throat, sounded guilty. No one touched their champagne anymore. The wine glasses stood untouched, sparkling under the chandeliers like fragile weapons waiting to strike again. Richard Coleman stood at the center, his face set in iron. His gaze roamed the hall, meeting eyes that quickly dropped away. For decades, he had lived among power bankers, politicians, executives, yet he had never felt so utterly alone among them. Except for Anna. The little girl stayed at his side, one hand gripping his jacket sleeve. Her wide eyes scanned the crowd like a lantern, cutting through masks. She had no fear of wealth or titles. Her truth came raw, without polish. That truth had saved his life once already, and Richard clung to it now more than any boardroom strategy or political ally. Mark Stevens, his bodyguard, stepped forward, his voice commanding. We've searched the building. 2 poisoned bottles secured. 1 missing from the manifest. Someone here had help smuggling them in. We're closing in. But this hall is still a snake pit until we know who. The crowd bristled. Senator Harlow barked, "This is preposterous. You cannot hold us here like criminals." Richard's glare silenced him. "A dog lies dead, Senator. That could have been me. You'll stay until I know who put it there." Harlow's face darkened, but he fell silent, muttering curses under his breath. Anna tugged at Richard's sleeve again. She pointed toward Belinda, the event manager. "She keeps looking at the exits, like she's waiting for someone to rescue her." Richard's eyes locked on Belinda. "Step forward." Luck, Belinda obeyed, her hands twisting the clipboard she had clung to all evening. Her voice shook. "Mr. Coleman, I swear, I did nothing wrong. I arranged every delivery. I checked the manifests. Then explain how bottles go missing under your watch." His voice was cold, unrelenting. Tears welled in her eyes. "I don't know. I've worked these galas for 10 years. I've never failed you." Anna tilted her head. Her voice was sharp for someone so small. "She's not lying about working hard, but she's hiding something. Something else." Richard narrowed his eyes. "What are you hiding, Belinda?" Belinda shook her head furiously. "Nothing. Please, Mr. Coleman, please." But her trembling, her darting eyes, told another story. Before Richard could press further, Vanessa swept forward, her gown trailing like silver water, her voice slicing through the tension. "Richard, this has gone far enough. You are humiliating us all. These are your donors, your supporters. Do you want them to remember tonight as the night you accused them like criminals?" Richard turned to her, his patience gone. Do you think I care about reputation when someone tried to kill me in front of all of you? Her painted smile faltered, cracks showing. She pressed her hand to his chest. But darling, don't darling me, he snapped, pulling free. His voice echoed under the chandeliers. If you care more about appearances than my life, then perhaps you don't belong at my side at all. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Vanessa's eyes widened, fury flashing beneath her mask before she turned away. Face stiff as marble, Anna's small voice broke the silence. She's mad. Not scared. Mad you said that in front of everyone. Richard studied Vanessa's stiff back. Mad, but was that anger of guilt or pride? Mark's radio crackled. Sir, a guard's voice came through. We found something else. A second signal napkin, same mark as before. This one was tucked under a serving tray. Whoever planted it was close to the staff. Richard's jaw tightened. He turned toward the guests. Who here spoke with the staff tonight? Who gave instructions for my service? Voices rose at once, defensive, frantic. I only asked for water. This is absurd. Anna's eyes darted, sharp as knives. She whispered. They're all shouting at once. The guilty one is quiet. Richard's eyes scanned the hall. He spotted Franklin Reese standing stiff, lips pressed tight, saying nothing while the others defended themselves. Reese, Richard's voice cut like a blade, step forward. The banker stumbled, eyes darting. I didn't do anything. I swear it. Anna interrupted. You're scared again. But this time, you're quiet because you know something. You're hiding it. Reese's lips trembled. His hands clutched his silk handkerchief like a lifeline. It wasn't me. But I know who spoke to the staff. I saw them. I didn't want to be involved. The room erupted with whispers. Richard's eyes narrowed. Then speak. Who was it? Reese's voice cracked. If I say, they'll ruin me. They'll destroy me. Mark stepped forward, his hand clamping on the banker's shoulder. Then they'll destroy you anyway. Talk. Reese's face turned pale, sweat dripping down his temples. His lips parted. But before the words could escape, a loud crash rang out near the back of the hall. One of the guards shouted, Sir! Someone tried to slip out through the service door. The hall gasped, panic rippling like fire through dry grass. Richard's heart thundered. The mask was slipping. The traitor was moving. Anna's grip tightened on his jacket. Her small voice steady as stone. They're scared now. The guilty one knows time is running out. Richard lifted his voice, thunderous, final. Seal every exit. No one leaves until the traitor is dragged into the light. The crowd froze, terror carved into their faces. Somewhere among them, Richard knew. The betrayer was sweating, trembling, cornered. And soon, the truth would break free. The crash of the service door echoed like a gunshot, sending a wave of panic through the glittering crowd. High heels scraped across marble as guests shuffled back, clutching pearls and glasses as if they were shields. Murmurs broke into frantic voices. The grand gala, once an evening of elegance, now pulsed with fear like a hunted animal's heartbeat. Richard Coleman stood tall, his chest rising and falling with the steady rhythm of a man refusing to bow. But inside, the billionaire's heart thudded like a war drum. He had been betrayed in his own house, his gala, his circle of trust, and the poison had been meant for him. Seal the exits now. Mark barked again, his voice cutting through the noise. Guards moved swiftly, locking doors, forming barricades, radios crackling with orders. One guard dragged forward a young waiter who had tried to slip out. The boy's face was pale, eyes wide with terror. Richard's eyes narrowed. Bring him here. The waiter stumbled under the guard's grip, shaking his head violently. I didn't do anything. Please. Let me go. Anna's small voice carried over the chaos. Then why did you run? The hall went silent. All eyes turned to the child. Her gaze never wavered from the terrified waiter. She had spoken with the blunt honesty of someone too young to play games. and that truth landed harder than any accusation from Richard himself. "I swear," the boy sobbed. "I only wanted to go home. I didn't put poison in anything. I didn't know." Mark shoved him forward. "Then why bolt when we locked the doors?" The boy's voice cracked. Because I saw something. I saw someone give Santo the envelope. I saw the bottle with the blue mark. But I was scared to say anything. I thought if I ran, they'd never find me." Richard stepped closer, his voice like iron. "Who? Who gave Santo the order?" The boy's eyes darted across the crowd. His lips trembled. "I can't. If I say, I'm dead." Anna's small hand tightened on Richard's sleeve. She whispered, "He knows, but he's more scared of them than of you." Richard's chest ached with rage. Someone here had turned his world into a battlefield, and now even a terrified waiter was too afraid to speak. His voice thundered. "If you want protection, boy, you have it. Say the name, and I'll see no harm comes to you." The boy swallowed hard, tears brimming, his lips parted. But before he could speak, another voice sliced through the hall. "That's enough." It was Vanessa. She swept forward, her silver gown catching the light, her eyes sharp as blades. Her smile was gone, replaced by a fury she no longer tried to hide. "This has gone far enough, Richard. Parading servants and children, making them accuse innocent people, it's madness. You're letting paranoia rule you, and you're dragging all of us down into it." Gasps rippled through the hall. Vanessa had been defiant before, but never this raw, never this venomous. Richard's gaze turned on her, steady and cold. "Why are you so afraid of the truth, Vanessa?" Her chin lifted defiantly. "Because this isn't truth. It's chaos. You're humiliating yourself in front of everyone who matters." Anna's voice cut the silence. "She's lying," the guests murmured, shocked that the child would dare again. But no one dismissed her this time. She had been right before. Vanessa spun, her eyes narrowing on the girl. "You insolent little brat. You've been nothing but trouble since you walked in here." Anna didn't flinch. She looked at Richard, her eyes wide but sure. "She's the one who hates you. She hides it with smiles. But it's her." The hall erupted. "Vanessa?" A donor gasped. "His fiancée?" Richard's stomach turned cold. The suspicion that had been gnawing at him now roared into focus. He saw it, the two perfect smiles, the endless concern for appearances, the way she had tried to shut him down at every turn. Vanessa's eyes glittered with fury. "You're really going to take the word of a child over mine?" Richard's voice was low, deadly. "I'll take the word of the one who saved my life." The room shook with the weight of his words. Vanessa's face twisted, her mask of charm shattering at last. For a moment, raw hatred burned through her expression. And Richard saw her clearly not as a fiancée, not as a partner, but as someone who might very well want him gone. Mark's voice broke the tension. "Sir, we've got to move her aside." For questioning, guards stepped forward. But Vanessa lifted her chin, her voice cutting like glass. "You'll regret this, Richard. You'll regret doubting me." The guards seized her arms. The crowd gasped, whispers erupting like wildfire. Richard turned away, his jaw set. His chest felt hollow, but he couldn't show weakness now. Anna tugged gently at his jacket. Her voice was quiet but steady. "You're closer now. The truth is almost here." "Huh." Richard looked down at her, this little girl who had turned his world upside down. And for the first time, he believed her completely. The gala was no longer about charity. It was no longer about money or reputation. It was about survival. And the walls of the grand hall were closing in on the guilty. The hall was no longer a ballroom. It was a pressure cooker. The chandeliers blazed like interrogation lamps. The polished marble floor felt like a courtroom. And every guest stood on trial. The air was thick with fear, perfume mingling with the sharp tang of spilled wine that still stained the floor where a dog had died. Richard Coleman's fiancée, Vanessa, was being restrained by two guards. Her silver gown shimmered, but her face had twisted into something ugly. Anger stripped of charm, She jerked against the guards, her voice sharp enough to slice glass. "Unhand me. This is outrageous. I am his fiancée. I belong at his side, not in chains like a criminal." Richard stood tall, his expression grave. "If you belong at my side, Vanessa, then prove you didn't want me dead." Her laugh was bitter, echoing across the stunned hall. "You think I'd waste my future? My life of luxury, just to kill you? Don't flatter yourself." Gasps rose among the guests. Anna, standing close to Richard, whispered up to him. "She's not scared. She's angry. Angry that you caught her mask slipping." Richard's jaw tightened. He had seen many masks in his life, smiling investors, flattering politicians, but Vanessa's was the most personal. And it was unraveling before his eyes. Mark Stevens stepped forward, his broad frame radiating control. "Sir, we can isolate her, question her privately. But if she's behind this, she may not be the only one. Whoever set this up planned carefully." Richard nodded slowly. "Do it. Take her away." "No." Vanessa's voice cracked, her struggle wild now. "Richard, you fool. You're throwing everything away. Do you think anyone will respect you after this circus? You'll lose the board, the donors, the world." Richard's reply was steady, ice cold. "Better to lose the world than my life." The guards pulled her toward the side doors, her heels scraping against marble. The guests whispered, their words like daggers in the air. Some pitied her, others feared her. Many silently wondered if the glamorous woman had truly conspired to murder the man she was to marry. But Richard wasn't finished. His gaze swept the hall. "This is not over. Vanessa may be guilty, or she may be a pawn. But the truth is here, in this room. And I swear to you, I will not rest until I uncover it." The room froze under his words. No one dared move. Santo, the trembling sommelier still under guard, suddenly cried out. "It wasn't just her. Don't you see? She couldn't have done it alone." Richard turned sharply. "Explain." Santo's hands shook as he wrung them together. She gave me a look tonight. Not words, just a look. But it wasn't her who handed me the money. It was a man. A man with power. Someone you trust. I swear, I only followed orders. Please don't let them kill my boy." The hall gasped. Whispers darted like sparks. "A man? Someone else? Who?" Anna's eyes darted, searching the crowd, her small voice trembling but clear. "He's telling the truth. She wasn't alone. Somebody else wanted it too. Somebody important." Richard's pulse pounded in his ears. His gaze swept the crowd. Harlow, Reese, Belinda, and countless others, all masks of wealth and influence, hiding truths beneath silk and smiles. Which one of them had marked him for death? Senator Harlow's voice rang out, too loud, too forceful. "This is madness. You're turning a gala into a witch hunt. If you drag this out, you'll destroy yourself. Can't you see? Your enemies outside this hall will seize on this chaos. The headlines will write themselves. Billionaire loses mind." Anna's voice shot back, small but fierce. "Maybe you're scared because you're part of it." The senator's face turned crimson. "Outrageous," he bellowed, but his outrage only stoked the fire of suspicion. Richard stepped forward, his voice resonating with the authority of a man who had commanded empires. "No, what's outrageous is that someone in this hall tried to murder me, and you think I should worry about headlines. Tonight I worry about truth, not reputation." The room went silent again. Guests shifted uneasily, but no one dared speak. Mark leaned in, his voice low. "Sir, we need to narrow it down. Fear is working, but panic won't give us the name. We push too hard, they'll close ranks." Richard nodded, his gaze dropped to Anna. "What do you think?" Her eyes swept the crowd, lingering on faces, on the way hands fidgeted, how shoulders tensed. Her voice was quiet but sure. "The one who planned this, they're not scared enough. Everyone's shaking, but not them. They're calm. Too calm." Richard followed her gaze. His eyes fell on Franklin Reese. The banker was no longer sweating like before. His face was oddly composed, his breathing steady. "Reese," Richard said, his voice cutting like glass. "Step forward." The banker obeyed slowly, adjusting his cufflinks with deliberate calm. His smile was thin, practiced. "Richard, surely you don't suspect me. I've been your ally for years. We've raised millions together." Richard's eyes narrowed. "And yet tonight you've been quiet when others shouted. Too quiet. Almost as if you know more than you should." Anna whispered. "He looks like he's pretending to be brave. That means he's hiding something." Reese's lips twitched. The faintest crack in his mask. He cleared his throat. "You're grasping at shadows, Richard. This whole charade will ruin you. Release us before you regret this." Richard stepped closer, his voice low but heavy with threat. "If I release you, it may be the last mistake I make. And I do not plan to die tonight." The hall held its breath. Reese's eyes darted for the first time, breaking his calm facade. Sweat began to bead at his temple once more. The mask was slipping, and Richard knew the traitor was closer than anyone wanted to admit. The air in the ballroom had grown suffocating. The chandeliers still blazed above, but their brilliance no longer dazzled it accused. Every gleam of crystal, every shadow on the marble floor, seemed to point fingers. Guests stood frozen, too afraid to breathe, waiting for the next revelation. Richard Coleman stood at the center, his body rigid, his eyes fixed on Franklin Reese. The banker's calm mask had begun to crack. For hours, Reese had sweated and stammered. But now, when others grew frantic, he had gone still. Too still. Anna tugged lightly at Richard's sleeve, her voice low but piercing. "It's him. He's not scared like the others. He's trying too hard to be brave." Reese's lips curled into a strained smile. "Richard, surely you don't mean to accuse me. We've built fortunes together, funded schools, hospitals. Do you think I'd throw all of that away to slip poison into your glass?" Richard stepped forward, his voice low and cold. "I think men have killed for far less." The hall erupted into gasps. Reese's composure faltered for a moment, his eyes darting toward the guarded doors, but he quickly recovered, straightening his jacket. "This is madness. You're letting paranoia poison your mind more than any bottle could." Mark moved closer, his presence looming. "Then you won't mind answering questions?" Reese's jaw tightened, but he forced a chuckle. "Of course. Ask me anything. I've nothing to hide," Anna whispered. "He's lying. His smile is fake." Richard's heart pounded in his chest. He wanted to believe Reese, wanted to believe at least one of the men he had built his empire beside wasn't trying to destroy him. But the weight in his gut told him Anna was right. Richard's voice rang out, steady and sharp. "Where were you when Santo received the bribe?" Reese blinked. I was networking. Talking with donors. As I always do." Anna's small voice broke in again, louder now. "That's not true. I saw you. You weren't talking to anyone. You were standing by the catering doors, watching." The room erupted in gasps. Eyes turned on Reese like arrows loosed from bows. His face drained of color, then flushed with fury. "You dare accuse me based on the word of a child?" he thundered. Richard's voice boomed back. "That child saved my life. Her word holds more weight than yours tonight." Reese's mask cracked fully now. His breathing quickened. His eyes flicked to the guards at the door, measuring distance. Richard saw it the look of a cornered man weighing flight over fight. "Mark," Richard said quietly, never breaking Reese's gaze. "Don't let him move." Mark's hand rested near his holster. The guards at the doors shifted, ready, but Reese suddenly laughed, though the sound rang hollow. "Richard, listen to yourself. You're destroying everything you've built, all because of one little girl's wild stories. Do you think anyone will follow you after tonight? You're finished." "Oh." Richard stepped closer, his eyes like steel. "If I am finished, it will not be by your hand." The hall was silent except for the shallow breathing of frightened guests. Reese's facade trembled. Sweat rolled down his temple, and then his mask dropped entirely. His smile twisted into a snarl. "You always thought you were untouchable, Richard," he hissed. "Always above the rest of us. But power attracts enemies, and sometimes the knife comes from the hand closest to you." Gasps exploded across the hall. Anna's small voice rang like a bell. "It's him. I told you." Reese's eyes darted wildly. He lunged not for Richard, but for the nearest guard, his hand clawing for the weapon at the man's hip. The crowd screamed, women clutching pearls, men stumbling backward, but Mark was faster. He slammed into Reese, wrenching him down to the marble floor. The crack of impact silenced the room. Guards swarmed, restraining the banker as he thrashed, spitting curses. "You'll regret this, Coleman." Reese roared, his voice hoarse with rage. "You think you've won? You have no idea who else is against you." His words echoed, chilling the guests. Who else? Was Reese only a piece of something larger? Richard's heart thundered as he stepped forward, looking down at the man he had once called an ally. His voice was low, deadly. "You tried to poison me in my own house. You betrayed everything we built. And you did it with the arrogance to think I wouldn't see." Reese spat at the floor, his eyes blazing with hatred. "You were never meant to live past tonight." Anna's small fingers tightened around Richard's sleeve. Her whisper was steady despite the chaos. "You're still in danger." He said, "There are more." Richard's jaw hardened. She was right. Reese may have been caught, but the game was not over. Someone else had laid this trap with him. Richard raised his voice to the hall, his tone like a gavel slamming down. Tonight, Franklin Reese revealed himself. But he wasn't alone. Someone here still hides behind a mask. And I swear on my life, I will find them too. The chandeliers glittered coldly above as the guests recoiled in fear. Somewhere in that room, another traitor waited, calm and hidden. And Richard Coleman knew this battle was far from finished. The echo of Franklin Reese's outburst lingered in the hall like smoke after a gunshot. Guards held him pinned to the marble floor, his cufflinks scraping against the stone as he writhed, his curses filling the air. Guests shrank back, horrified, whispering frantically to one another. The glittering chandeliers above now seemed cruel, their brilliance throwing every shadow into sharp relief. Richard Coleman stood over Reese, his chest heaving but his face hard as carved stone. This was no longer business, no longer politics. It was betrayal, raw and unmasked. And yet, even with Reese pinned to the ground, Richard knew Anna was right. The plot ran deeper. Reese was not alone. Anna's small voice reached him, steady despite her size. He didn't plan it all. Someone else gave the orders. Richard's eyes lifted to the crowd. Dozens of faces stared back, some pale with fear, others sharp with calculation. Behind one of those masks hid the true hand behind the poison. Mark loomed at Richard's side, his voice low and urgent. "Sir, we've got to remove him now. Interrogate him privately. The longer he stays here, the more dangerous this crowd becomes." Richard nodded, but his voice rose, steady and commanding, so the hall could hear. "Take Reese away. He will answer for what he's done." As guards hauled Reese to his feet, the banker spat once more at Richard's shoes. His voice dripped venom. "You think catching me saves you? You're blind, Richard. You have no idea who's really pulling the strings." "No." The words rippled through the guests like a shockwave. The guards dragged him away, his curses echoing until the doors shut behind them. Silence descended, heavy and suffocating. All eyes turned back to Richard, waiting, judging. Richard raised his chin. One traitor revealed. But Reese is right about one thing: he wasn't working alone. The real mastermind is still here, among you. The room froze. People whispered, fidgeted. Some looked ready to collapse. Anna clung tighter to his sleeve. "They're hiding, but they'll slip if you push harder." Richard's gaze swept the crowd. He saw Senator Harlow's flushed face, Belinda's trembling hands, Vanessa's burning eyes, even as guards kept her apart from the others. Every one of them looked guilty. Every one of them could be hiding the final blade aimed at his back. Mark leaned close again. "We need to isolate key suspects." Reese was just the front. Someone powerful, someone in this room made the call. Richard's voice was ice. Then we start cutting until the truth bleeds through. He stepped forward, his gaze locking on Belinda, the event manager. You ran this gala. You oversaw every delivery, every bottle, every tray, yet 2 poisoned bottles slipped through. Tell me, Belinda, how does that happen? Belinda stammered, her eyes wide. I don't know. I swear I checked everything. I've worked for you for years, Mr. Coleman. I would never— Anna cut in, her child's voice sharper than steel. You're not lying about the years, but you're scared about something else. You're not telling all the truth. Belinda's face crumpled. They threatened me too. Not like Santo, not with family. They said if I spoke up, if I questioned the shipment, they'd ruin me. They'd destroy everything I've worked for. Gasps swept the hall. Richard's jaw clenched. So you stayed quiet and nearly let me die. Tears streamed down her cheeks. I thought maybe it was nothing. I didn't know it was real poison. Please believe me. Richard's heart burned with fury. But beneath it, something colder settled. Reese had been the weapon. Belinda had been the cover. But someone else had been the hand that guided them both. He turned, his voice thundering. You see? Reese was not alone. There is rot in this room. And until I tear it out, no one leaves. The guests murmured in fear, their polished masks slipping into panic. Senator Harlow suddenly barked, his voice cracking. Enough of this witch hunt. Do you want to be remembered as the paranoid billionaire who accused everyone he knew? Let us go, Richard, before this spectacle ruins you. Richard's eyes snapped to him. Why are you so desperate to leave, Senator? The man stiffened. Because this is madness. Anna's voice cut the silence. Or because you're afraid you'll be next. The hall gasped. Harlow's face turned crimson. He sputtered, but his hands trembled at his sides. Mark stepped closer, his voice rumbling. He's rattled. Do you want me to press him? Richard studied the senator, his mind racing. Harlow had motive ambition, resentment, a lust for control. But was he the hand, or just another mask? Before Richard could decide, one of the guards rushed in from the catering wing. His face was pale, his voice urgent. Sir, we found a note, tucked inside a staff locker. It names Reese, but it also says, the other will stay hidden until the moment is right. The room went still. Guests stared at one another, terror in their eyes. Anna whispered, her voice trembling but sure. The other one is still here. Waiting. Richard's chest felt heavy as stone. He turned back to the hall, his voice rising, steady and unyielding. Reese may be gone, but his partner remains. And mark my words, the truth will drag them into the light, no matter how deep they hide. The chandeliers glittered coldly as the crowd shifted, fear thickening. Somewhere among them, another traitor stood silent, calculating, waiting for their moment, and Richard Coleman knew the night's deadliest battle had yet to begin. The hall was no longer grand, it was suffocating. The chandeliers above seemed less like jewels of light and more like interrogation lamps, glaring down on a courtroom of trembling suspects. Every cough, every shuffle of polished shoes echoed like gunfire in the silence. Richard Coleman stood unmovable at the center, though his chest was tight with rage. Reese had been dragged away, exposed as one betrayer. Belinda had admitted her silence, but the note, found in a staff locker, had confirmed the darkest truth. Another conspirator remained. Someone more cunning. Someone waiting. Anna's little voice broke the silence, her words cutting sharper than steel. They're watching you, Mr. Coleman, waiting for the moment you stop looking. That's when they'll strike. Richard looked down at her. For a child, she had more clarity than men twice his age. And she was right. He could feel the eyes on him cold, calculating eyes hidden behind jeweled masks. Mark Stevens stepped closer, his tone low but tense. Sir, the note proves this wasn't just Reese. But if the other is still here, they're not panicking like the rest. They're calm. We need to flush them out. Richard nodded, His voice carried like a gavel striking wood. Listen to me. All of you. Franklin Reese confessed his hatred and his plot. But he was not alone. Another stands among you, smiling, watching, and I will tear the mask from their face tonight. The crowd erupted. Some swore their innocence, others demanded release. Senator Harlow's voice boomed, his face red with anger. This is a farce. You're turning allies into enemies. End this madness before you destroy yourself. Richard's glare burned into him. A man who fears being tested is often the man with something to hide. Anna pointed, her small hand steady. He shouts too much. He wants you to look at him. So you don't look at the real one. The hall gasped. Richard's mind sharpened. Could the senator be a decoy, a noisy distraction, while the true betrayer waited in silence? Before he could speak, one of the guards approached, holding another discovery, a small vial, no bigger than a thumb, found hidden under a catering tray. The liquid inside shimmered faintly, sinister even in the light. Mark examined it, his jaw tightening. Sir, it's concentrated. Stronger than the bottles. Whoever planned this had a backup plan. The crowd groaned in horror. A woman fainted. Her companion caught her, trembling himself. The walls of wealth and power had crumbled into raw survival. Richard's voice cut the panic short. A vial this small could have slipped into any drink, any dish. Whoever carries this is still in this hall. And they are patient, ruthless. Anna's eyes scanned the room, then fixed on Vanessa, who stood apart under guard, her beauty marred by fury. She knows something. Even if she didn't do it, she knows who did. Richard approached Vanessa, his eyes locked on hers. You've fought me at every turn tonight. You've cared more for appearances than my life. And now a note and a vial prove Reese wasn't alone. Tell me what you know, Vanessa, or admit your part. Her laugh was cold, brittle. You think I'd confess here, in front of your sycophants and your precious child? No, Richard. If you want the truth, you'll have to dig deeper than that. Anna spoke again, her voice steady. She's scared, but not of you, of someone else. Vanessa's eyes flickered for a second, betraying something she hadn't meant to reveal. Richard saw it. A slip, brief but deadly. Mark, Richard said, his voice low and final. Keep her under guard. She knows more than she admits. Mark nodded. Richard turned back to the crowd. If Reese was the knife, then one of you was the hand that guided it. And until I know which hand it was, no one leaves. The silence was broken only by whispers, sharp and frantic. Wealth, titles, reputations, all of it had melted into the same fear that clung to every corner of the room. Anna tugged gently at Richard's sleeve. They're going to try again, tonight, before we leave this hall. Richard's chest tightened. He believed her. The danger wasn't over, it was closing in. Raising his voice once more, he declared, The guilty think they can outweight me. But hear me now, I will not stop. Not until I've torn every mask away. If it takes all night, if it takes every guard and every ounce of strength, I will know who tried to bury me in my own house. The chandeliers glittered above like cold stars, but the hall was darker than ever. Somewhere in the crowd, a traitor waited, calm and silent, and Richard Coleman braced himself for the strike he knew was still to come. The Manhattan Foundation Hall was a tomb dressed in diamonds. The chandeliers blazed as though mocking the fear dripping from every guest. Men tugged nervously at bow ties. Women clutched pearls like rosaries, and not a single glass of champagne had been touched since the poisoned wine was revealed. Richard Coleman stood in the center, a commander on hostile ground. Franklin Reese had been dragged out, exposed as one conspirator. Belinda had admitted her silence. Vanessa was under guard, spitting venom. And yet, Richard knew it wasn't finished. The note, the vial, Anna's certainty, someone else was still hiding. Anna clung to his sleeve, her dark eyes locked on the crowd. Her voice was small, but it carried in the silence like a bell. They're waiting, Mr. Coleman. The one who wants you gone isn't panicking. They're too calm. Richard's jaw tightened. Calm in a storm meant control. And control meant power. Whoever had stayed composed through the chaos was either a master liar or the one behind it all. Mark Stevens moved close, his broad frame shadowing Richard. His whisper was gravel. "Sir, I've seen coups, ambushes, political setups. This reeks of something larger." Reese was a pawn. "We've got a mastermind in this hall." Richard nodded, eyes scanning faces. Senator Harlow glared like a man wronged. Belinda quivered, her clipboard forgotten. Vanessa simmered in her corner, and others, donors, CEOs, board members, shifted in fear. Yet one of them was more serpent than sheep. Richard raised his voice, steady and sharp. "You've all seen Reese exposed. You've heard Belinda confess her silence. You've seen poison dragged into the open. But still, one of you waits. One of you planned this deeper than the rest, and I promise you I will find you before the night ends." The guests shifted, fear sparking panic. A woman sobbed. A man shouted that he wanted to call his lawyer. Senator Harlow roared, "This is tyranny. Richard, you'll destroy yourself with this madness." Richard's glare locked onto him. "I'll destroy myself, or will you destroy me, Senator? You fought me in boardrooms, in ballots, in whispers. Tell me, how far would you go to silence me?" The hall gasped. Harlow's face turned scarlet. "I may despise your idealism, but I am no murderer." Anna's voice cut in, sharp as glass. "Then why are you yelling so much?" "People who tell the truth don't need to yell." The guests stared. Some nodded slowly. Harlow sputtered, but his words faltered, drowned beneath suspicion. Before Richard could press further, Mark's radio crackled. A guard's voice, tense. "Sir, we found another message. Stuffed in a bathroom vent. It says, 'The hand you seek is closer than you think.'" A shiver rippled through the room. Guests muttered, their voices tight with terror. Richard's face hardened. "Closer than I think." His eyes swept the hall again, slower this time. Every mask, every twitch, every false smile. Anna's small hand tugged at him again. Her whisper was quiet but sure. "It's not just about who looks guilty. It's who's acting like they belong here when they shouldn't." Richard frowned. "Explain." Anna pointed toward Belinda. She admitted being scared. Reese exploded. Vanessa got mad. The senator yells. But one person hasn't cracked at all. Not once. Richard followed her gaze. At the far edge of the crowd, near the marble column, stood a man in a dark tailored suit, quiet, polished, unreadable. One of the board trustees, Gregory Vance. He had said little all night, blending into the edges, sipping water instead of wine, watching with a cool detachment. Richard's chest tightened. Gregory Vance, the man he had trusted with major accounts, a steady hand in the foundation for years. Could it be him? Richard's voice rung out. "Vance, step forward." The man obeyed with calm precision, his expression unshaken. "Richard," he said smoothly, "this circus is beneath you. I've stood by your side for 15 years. You know me." Richard's gaze drilled into him. "That's why you'd be perfect. No one suspects the quiet hand. Tell me, Gregory, why haven't you spoken tonight? Why sit in silence while poison dripped into my glass?" Vance's smile was faint, calculated. "Because I don't speak without reason. And tonight, Richard, reason is in short supply." Anna whispered fiercely. "He's lying. His calm isn't real. It's practiced." Richard took a step closer, his voice sharp. Reese cracked. Belinda trembled. Vanessa raged. "But you cool as stone. Almost as though you knew what would happen before it did." The guests gasped, turning their eyes on Vance. His mask flickered, a small crack in his composure. His eyes darted, just for a heartbeat, toward Vanessa, under guard. Richard saw it. The connection, a hidden alliance. Mark muttered at his side. "There it is." He slipped. Richard raised his voice, every syllable a hammer. "Gregory Vance, did you order Reese to slip me poison? Did you plan my death while shaking my hand? The hall froze, breathless. Vance's jaw tightened. For a moment, he said nothing. Then, slowly, he smiled a cold, serpent smile. You've always underestimated me, Richard. You still do. Gasps tore through the hall. Anna clung tighter to Richard, her whisper trembling but fierce. It's him. He's the one. Richard's heart pounded, his fury blazing. The true traitor had shown his face at last. The chandeliers glared down like a jury of fire, their brilliance throwing long shadows across the hall. The glitter of gowns and tuxedos had lost all meaning. Now the room felt like a battlefield. All eyes were locked on Gregory Vance, the calm, quiet trustee who had finally let his mask slip. Richard Coleman's voice rang across the marble floor, sharp and unyielding. You admit it. You stood beside me for 15 years, pretended loyalty, and all the while plotted my death. Vance's smile was chilling. Too composed for a man accused. Plotted? No, Richard. I planned survival. You may not want to hear this, but your empire has enemies in every corner. Some want your money, some want your downfall, some simply want the power you've hoarded. I didn't create the storm. I only chose to ride it. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The guests drew back, horrified, as the betrayal twisted into justification. Anna stepped forward, her little voice clear. You gave Santo the money. You told him what to do. You were the hand. Vance's eyes flicked to her, his composure finally cracking for an instant. And what are you, child? A stray mutt barking at the wrong tree? You think anyone will believe you over me? Richard's fury surged. He moved between Anna and Vance, his broad shoulders a shield. His voice was ice. I believe her. And tonight, that is all that matters. Mark Stevens barked an order. Guards surged forward, surrounding Vance. But the trustee didn't flinch. His calm was unnerving, his voice steady, even as men twice his size closed in. You can drag me out in chains, Richard, Vance said coolly. But you can't stop what's already in motion. Reese was one piece. I am another. Do you really think it ends with me? The words froze the air. Guests gasped. Fear rippled like a wave. Richard's eyes narrowed. Then tell me who else? Who else has betrayed me? Vance chuckled, the sound dry as ash. Wouldn't you like to know? Perhaps you'll spend the rest of your days searching, never trusting, always looking over your shoulder. That will be my victory. Anna's small hand clutched Richard's sleeve. Her whisper was fierce. Don't let him scare you. He wants you to give up. Richard straightened, his fury hardening into resolve. His voice thundered under the chandeliers. I will not live in fear, Gregory, and I will not fall tonight. Take him, Mark ordered. Guards closed in, seizing Vance by the arms. For the first time, his mask slipped fully, his calm shattered into a snarl. He thrashed, spitting curses. You think this is over? You're a dead man walking, Coleman. The next glass you raise will be your last. The guards dragged him toward the doors. His voice echoed until the heavy wood shut him out, leaving the hall in stunned silence. Richard turned back to the guests. Their eyes wide, frightened, uncertain clung to him. They had come expecting a night of glamour, of charity. Instead, they had witnessed poison, betrayal, and the unmasking of snakes in silken suits. He raised his voice, steady, grave. You came here to celebrate hope. But what you saw tonight was treachery. Reese and Vance plotted to bury me in my own house. They failed because one voice refused to be silenced. His hand rested gently on Anna's shoulder. She looked up at him, small but unflinching. Her dark eyes filled with truth. She saved my life, Richard said, while men of power looked away. This child saw what none of you dared. Let that shame you. And let it remind you justice can rise from the smallest voice. Even when the world tries to ignore it, the hall stirred. Some guests bowed their heads. Others clapped softly, then louder, until applause thundered beneath the chandeliers. It was not celebration, it was relief, catharsis, acknowledgement of survival. Richard lowered his gaze to Anna. His voice softened, so only she could hear. You were right from the start. Without you, I'd be dead. Her reply was simple, pure. I just didn't want them to win. Emotion tightened his chest. For years, he had believed loyalty could be bought with wealth. That power was protection. Tonight, a child had shattered that illusion and saved his life with nothing but courage. Mark stepped forward, his voice quieter now. Sir, the danger isn't gone. If Vance spoke true, there are others. We'll need to dig. Deeper than ever before. Richard nodded, his face solemn. Then we'll dig. But tonight, we survived. He turned back to the crowd. Go home. Hold your loved ones tighter tonight. And remember, evil doesn't always come in the shadows. Sometimes it comes smiling, wearing silk. But truth will always tear it down. The guests filed out, shaken but alive. As the hall emptied, Richard remained by Anna's side. The chandeliers dimmed above, leaving only their reflections on the marble floor. For the first time in years, Richard Coleman felt something unfamiliar gratitude that came not from power, not from wealth, but from the courage of a child who had spoken truth when no one else dared. He looked down at her, a faint smile breaking through the storm of the night. You've changed everything, Anna, perhaps even me. Duh. And as they stepped out of the grand hall together, into the cool Manhattan night, Richard knew this was not the end of the battle, but it was the beginning of something greater, the fight not just for survival, but for justice. In the end, the night revealed a truth far greater than wealth or power, that loyalty cannot be bought, and justice can come from the most unexpected voices. Richard Coleman learned that betrayal often hides behind polished smiles, but so too does courage hide in unlikely places. A 6-year-old child, dismissed by many as powerless, became the reason a billionaire lived to see another day. The lesson is clear. Never ignore the small voice that dares to speak the truth, for it may be the only shield against the lies of the powerful.